Rosie. How are you?
How are you doing?
Hey, Kim.
Well, yeah.
She's going to speak for them.
Is she speaking? Wait, I didn't think we...
I would like to call this City Council meeting to order. It's a City Council budget workshop this evening. And I've asked Councilmember Lamb if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance right from his chair. So if we could all stand for the pledge, please.
Please repeat after me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Before our city manager begins, I'm going to turn a little bit of time to Chris. He wanted to take a minute.
Thank you, Mayor. This evening I left for the members of council and for the senior staff that are sitting here a little bag of spice in front of your desk. I've been out for the last couple of weeks out of town, and one of the places I went is known for some of their spices. And I wanted to be able to bring something back to let everyone know that I was still thinking about what was going on here. And I thought this was most appropriate because as you look at some of these different spices, they reminded me a lot of the various personalities that we have here in city government and city administration. Some of these are very strong, and if taken by themselves, really just, it doesn't give you the effect that you want. But when you take all these different spices and mix them together, you get some incredible, amazing dishes and just absolutely amazing results. So the thought in passing these out, each person has, for the most part, a different spice, just to kind of remind us that the different personalities we have are really meant to, or with our different personalities and our different perspectives, our different visions and approaches, we're able to bring out the best of each other, make the meetings memorable, make things beneficial, and really make West Jordan a place where people want to be, something that's different, something unique, and something that others will strive to recreate. So that's the purpose behind the bag of spice that each of you have. So hope you enjoy it, and like I said, by itself, it's really not going to be that good. So mix and match with those that are around you if you want to try something else. And I've got some Ziploc bags if you want to sample from each other. So enjoy. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. When I was growing up, Mary Jane meant something totally different than...
Well, that's in French. The spices are both in Arabic and in French, so I'm not sure exactly what any of these are. But yeah, that's not what you... Yeah.
And from the movie Help, where they make the pie, it's not anything to do with that, I hope. We're going to do a budget discussion tonight, so we're going to start by turning the time over to our city manager to move ahead with that.
City Council, the agenda is wide open from the standpoint that it's sort of informal, but I do have some anticipations.
Your mic's not live.
My mic's not working. Is this thing on? Button I can push.
Yeah, Jamie's working on it.
Is it working now?
No.
Still not working. I can take, there, is that better?
Better.
All right. I should start by telling you we are streaming this event. This is our first event of which it is available to be viewed both on Facebook and on the internet through our webpage. It will also be up on Facebook tomorrow morning with closed caption added. So that's kind of nice feature that by running it on Facebook, we get that additional bonus by doing it through them. With that said, the evening's activities are sort of set out this way. The first half hour, I'd like to turn over to two individuals to provide us some background and current history on Senate Bill 136, as that resolution has some tremendous impact on both our budget this year and potentially next year. I've asked for Cameron Deal of the League and Representative Kim Coleman, our representative, to come up here and spend the next 30 minutes both presenting and answering questions from their perspectives on Resolution 136. Once that half hour is concluded, then I'm going to actually ask each of the chairmen of the subcommittees to just give a brief summary of their conclusions of the subcommittee's findings. Then you'll hear from Bill Piper and myself to the extent of the item that was sent out in May 5th, talking about a tax increase of 10, 20, and 30%. If you have questions about that, and if it's needed clarifying the truth in taxation process, we'll consider that. We're wanting to do all of this in advance of the June 13th meeting next week so that hopefully it runs smoother. This is almost kind of like a work session. I think that'll appeal to some of you if you think of it in that general term. So if I can now turn over time to Cameron Deal. Cameron was here 6 months ago and talked about the reality of what we anticipated the legislature was going to do. We are now 6 months later, and he can provide us the absolute reality of what we're facing as a city and as a community. I also thought it critical to hear from a different perspective, at least from someone who has been in the trenches and fought the issues relevant to Senate Bill 136, and that's why I thought Representative Coleman would be an excellent candidate to kind of provide insight for us in that matter. So if I could ask Cameron Deal to step forward. I know he's anticipating about a 7-8 minute presentation. Same from Representative Coleman, and then open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the council. It's a privilege to be here with you. Dave mentioned that I was here 6 months ago, and I brought at that time concerns about what we thought would be in the transportation bill that came out of the Transportation Task Force. Part of the reason that I'm pleased to be before you today is because we as local governments did well in Senate Bill 136. And it was a collective effort by many of you on the dais and your city colleagues around the state. I want to go back in time a little bit, though, even before 6 months ago, to the 2014 interim, the 2014 off-season leading up to the 2015 legislative session. It was during that time, over several months, and I actually was here in West Jordan during that time as well, where we were discussing the need for additional local transportation funding. The legislature in that previous session, on the last night of the session, chose not to pass a bill that passed the House and failed in the Senate that would have invested a full $0.25 into transit. And we raised concerns all along that if there was going to be new money for local transportation, that money needed to be multimodal and needed to include local governments, particularly cities and counties, in addition to transit. Over the next few months, the league membership, and several of you were at our conference in September of 2014, unanimously passed a resolution calling on the legislature to pass legislation that would give additional financing tools to local government for transportation. And that's what happened in 2015. The legislature passed a historic bill, House Bill 362. One component of House Bill 362 was what is known as the fourth quarter for transportation. And that fourth quarter is a county-imposed quarter where there's an actual formula set into code. It's the only place where this happens in the transportation code. And 40% of that money goes to cities, 40% of it goes to transit, and 20% of it goes to counties. At the time, the law required voter approval for House Bill 362's local option to be enacted. And over the course of the next two cycles, 21 of the 29 counties considered the local option, and 13 counties passed it. Salt Lake County is one county where voters did not pass the local option in that fourth quarter for transportation. Over the last couple of years, the legislature has looked at House Bill 362 and looked for ways to improve it. And over the course of last year, the Transportation Task Force met, and I was heavily involved with that, as was Representative Coleman. How many countless meetings did we attend last summer? Basically, a couple times a week, the entire summer, talking about everything from the governance of UTA to the integration of local land use with state transportation dollars and what that intersection of planning looks like, which is really where our biggest concern was last year, that there would be some state mandates about local planning, and we avoided those mandates, and we successfully lobbied those out of the bill. And then questions about funding. And part of the questions about funding is what you have before you now. SB 136 continued to authorize that fourth quarter for transportation, that county-imposed fourth quarter with the 40-40-20 percentage splits. What it did, though, is it made a couple of tweaks to how that fourth quarter is implemented. First, Senate Bill 136 no longer requires voter approval. The county can elect to impose that quarter cent. If the county does so by June 30th of 2019, so over the next, let's see, we're June now, so over the next 12 and a half months, if they do it by June 30th of 2019, the county would keep the full quarter cent until that date. And the statute then describes how the county is to spend that money. And the county, Salt Lake County, has sent a letter saying this is the process that we would use to spend that approximately $40 to $50 million of one-time money. They would use it to pay off transportation-related debt from the quarter, which is a different sales tax authorization. And they would create a process through COG that would allocate that money for local government, particularly city and metro township projects. Salt Lake County no longer has their own road system, so that money through the COG process would go to local governments. Come July 1, 2019, the distribution formula that I described from House Bill 362 would go into effect. 40% would go to cities, 40% would go to transit, 20% would go to the county, and then that formula would stay in effect in perpetuity. So essentially the county gets this one-time pot of money to pay off transportation-related debt, and in Salt Lake County's case, create this process through the COG, and then come July 1, 2019, that 40-40-20 formula would go into effect. If the county does not act by July 1, 2019, then that one-time bite at the apple expires, but they can still elect to impose that quarter cent over the next 12 months. If the county does not act by June 30th of 2020, then it creates a 2-year window where the individual cities within the county can impose that quarter cent. And the quarter cent is split half between the cities, and half with the transit system. And then that authorization, the entire authorization for the fourth quarter, expires in 2022. So it's a use it or lose it tax. Either local government imposes it or the state would remove the authorization. That's the big picture about how SB 136, the fourth quarter mechanism, works. I could chat about SB 136 and what it means for UTA governance, what it means for the prioritization process within UDOT's criteria, but in light of the relative short amount of time, I wanted to give you that background. Salt Lake County passed an ordinance several weeks ago that said that they would impose the tax so long as cities and metro townships within Salt Lake County passed resolutions of support. They set a threshold of 67% of the population of Salt Lake County. If enough cities that represent 67% of the county's population pass resolutions in support of that county ordinance by June 22nd, then that county ordinance goes into effect. That county ordinance would then give notice to the tax commission, and there's a 90-day window or 90-day delay in when the tax becomes effective. So the tax would become effective on October 1st of 2018. And then the money collected between October 1st, 2018 and June 30th of 2019 would go into that first bite at the apple fund that would go to pay off the transportation-related debt and into that COG process that the county is going to create. The county put together a list or a time frame of how this process would work. So they would open up for applications and have evaluation criteria finalized as of July 31st. They would solicit letters of intent to apply for the transportation projects of regional significance to municipalities effective August 1st with a deadline of the October 1st. There would be a select committee that would evaluate the proposals. That would be through COG. The mayor would make recommendations to the county council. The county council would act as of December 1st. Interlocal agreements would then be signed between the county and cities and metro townships, and then the money would begin to flow. With that, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions that you or your colleagues have about the breadth of SB 136. It was a 190-page bill. I read it multiple times, and I'm happy to go into additional detail if you see fit, but I'm also happy to take any questions you have about this particular piece of how the fourth quarter is implemented. The last thing I'll say with that is that the league membership passed that resolution back in the 2014 conference. The league was a strong supporter of House Bill 362 in 2015, and the league membership through our Legislative Policy Committee unanimously endorsed SB 136 during the legislative session.
Thank you. What I'd like to ask the council members to do is to jot down the questions they have, and then following Representative Coleman's remarks, then we would like to invite both of you up to the podium to answer questions that would be addressed to either one of you by the council members. So jot those down, and with that, then Representative Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I think Cameron did a great job of giving that history and that perspective and how this is supposed to work. I don't think it was my intention to get into the weeds on a lot of the numbers and stuff. My concern, and you've seen me, heard me publicly, express concern about process. And I would have to say that primarily, we voted for this, or we voted on this. The people spoke, and what's good about this is you have constituents, I have constituents. We have citizens that vote in elections and express their will to us. And I overlap with a lot of you, so I assume you're hearing very similar things. Citizens that I'm hearing from are fairly outraged that the legislature would completely ignore their vote. I don't know if we have to have any more discussion beyond that. The people spoke. There is not much more valuable in our country than that the citizens get to speak and be represented through elections. And our citizens spoke. That is the first problem with this process. I did oppose this bill for a number of reasons. But honestly, I don't know that we have to look any further than that. Number two is the county process. That the county would then, and I like to call this, I plagiarize this too, but the Pontius Pilate Act of the council, of the Salt Lake County Council, putting this off on our cities and essentially get to wash their hands of whatever the decision is. But I want you to think about something. We have, Mr. Bricky passed out sort of a calendar of when we expect all of the cities to vote. Is it possible that if you were the last city to vote that you would not have a vote? That a decision would be made and imposed upon you because the county imposed an ordinance that is fairly arbitrary in their Pontius Pilate Act? So on top of ignoring the voters, we would also seek to disenfranchise many, potentially, through acts of other cities. That other cities in this county have the potential to impose something on you even if you oppose it. And you who represent the citizens of this city. That is about as equally outrageous as the first point of this. We could be entirely disenfranchised, even if we vote no. So I think that was, I disagree with that approach to this tax. One of the things, some of the assumptions that we have in all this discussion, and as Mr. Deal pointed out, I think we spent 100 hours in transportation meetings. I promise you that's not fun. And water meetings may be less fun, but transportation meetings started with assumptions that I don't know that every citizen and voter, and I don't necessarily agree with. And there was a statement that there's a will that all transportation policy has to be multimodal. Is anyone asking the question if that's true? or if you believe that, or if that's a policy position that you uphold. I have seen a lot of will to segregate out forms of transportation policy and have them stand on its merit. We know we need roads out here. We need road funding. How much mass transit we want to invest in is an entirely different discussion. I was speaking to some colleagues today about what would it take for you to park your car indefinitely? We have this, there's a narrative out there that says we cannot build roads fast enough to accommodate the population growth. I promise you, we cannot build tracks lines enough to make it convenient enough for you to park your car indefinitely and put it under a cover. You're not gonna do it. And we've seen it, and we've had over 50 years of lots of mass transit subsidization across this country, and we don't see a lot of people ditching their cars. So when we talk about these investments, what I'm hearing from constituents is not necessarily that they voted against the tax because they didn't like the 40% that was gonna go to UTA, and so let's just change the governing structure, and now all of our concerns are relieved, and we support a sales tax increase. I'm not hearing that. It was not about UTA governance, although people do express to me their concern about the governance. It's not just that. It's how much do we really believe we should and can invest in mass transit and multimodal systems. So we know what we need out here. We know we need road funding. Your citizens are going to be taxed at a rate that they're going to get a portion back, and that there are going to be other entities that are going to decide how much you get back if you're prioritized at all. And by the way, a whole chunk of that is going to go to mass transit. A chunk of it's going to go to the county. And you have no guarantee of the projects coming back to you. So I think of that in that that's kind of the thing we hate about the federal government, right? That they take this money from us, and then we have to go back and beg for some of it to come back to us. Are we not facilitating other entities to be in that position as well? We continue to have policy positions that place the county in a middleman role in our government that I don't think they were ever intended to be in. We are not a scaffolded government structure in our state where you are subservient and subordinate to the county. Sometimes the legislature passes policy that kind of puts them in that role, and I think that frequently is not the best way to govern. It's inefficient. And what I'm hearing in the last couple weeks, council people, mayors, are telling me what some of the county officials are engaging in as far as sticks and carrots. And that is not a role that the county government should ever be in. The county government should never come to Mayor Jim Riding and say, hey, if you support this, Mayor, we'll put you on the committee so you can prioritize these projects. Or worse, Mayor Riding, if you don't expect to have your projects prioritized. What kind of legislation and county ordinance is that? That we place other entities in a position of threatening you or dangling an incentive in front of you. And then we do that in government. We do have sticks and carrots. But This is not a place that we should do it. I don't think it makes for good government. So my concerns with this is far more about process than substance, but I also think the substance is problematic as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I know even members of the legislature have also posed threat of future punishment. And I'm going to use that word because that is the appropriate word. If you don't support this, you may get punished. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We'd like to invite Cameron to come up to the podium, and both of you, and then council members, if you would just state who you'd like to answer your question, and then let them the opportunity. We'll start with Councilmember Lamb.
Yay, I got in first. Thank you both for being here today. I've enjoyed it on my time in council, getting to know both of you, and I think both of you for all the work that both of you do, not only for our area, but for our city. So thank you very much. When I was running for office, the one thing that I really brought up was it was called the never-ending tax. It's where we are taxed for something. Hey, let's do this so we can get this. But then 20 years later, that tax that we added on is never gone again. Is that the case with this tax as well? If this tax goes into effect with the percentage that's going to go in, and maybe Cameron, I'll have you answer this one. If this tax goes in effect, does it stay at that level forever, or does it taper off 5 years down the road?
Thank you for the question, council member. The way this fourth quarter works is that the county gets that amount of money for the next 12 months up until June 30th. And then if the tax is imposed, it goes 40%, 40%, 20%, and the tax does continue. And the reason the tax continues is because it's tied to transportation. This money can only be spent on transportation projects. So as you look at the 40-40-20 divide going forward, West Jordan and fellow cities would receive 40% of that money every year going forward to help address the transportation needs. And one thing that I've seen throughout my career at the league, and I started the league in 2006, is that cities are always facing a backlog of transportation projects. And that's just with the existing need, let alone when you factor in the population growth that we know is coming, that we're experiencing, and West Jordan is on the front lines of that population growth. There's a message that we're hearing from other policymakers around the state. Representative Coleman used some language that to me I prefer to look at it as like a message of we as a league and we as local government are constantly advocating for local authority. We're constantly advocating for local control. We're constantly advocating for tools to meet the needs in our communities. SB 136 and House Bill 362 before it is a vital tool for local governments to use. If local governments choose not to use it, it does send a message to the broader community of policymakers and residents and the like that maybe our needs aren't as great as we've been saying because we're saying no to this tool.
So it was suggested that would be the perception. That would be a perception that someone else would impose upon you. If you choose not to support this, it's not because you think you don't need road funding. That is absurd that anyone would ever claim that is why a city would not impose a sales tax that diverts a majority of that away from you. One of the things that we heard early on, and I hope this has been corrected for you, is that if you don't do this, the state will come back and do this anyway. Those provisions were removed in an earlier version of the bill. And I think Cameron and his organization, the league, was probably key to that. But the state will not come back in and just impose it anyway. But you get to speak and you get to say, yes, we want road funding. But every penny that goes to mass transit is a penny you don't get on road funding. The more we double down on multimodal means less or smaller pieces of the pie for the pieces that you do support. And maybe you are a supporter of mass transit and multimodal, and I think there's a role for that in certain circumstances. But the more we invest in one system, just divides what we are able to spend in another system. And because we keep hitching that together, you don't have that choice. I would rather see policy that says, let's let things, transportation funding policies stand on their own merits, and let's see what the people want.
Next question from Councilmember Burton.
Thank you, Mayor. This one, first of all, is for you, Representative Coleman. Did you vote for Senate Bill 136?
I did not.
And why did you choose not to?
I think I've stated the main reasons for that. The process was flawed. I should say my opinion is the process to turn around within such a short window and disregard the vote of the people and give the county the option of imposing it anyway is outrageous. Again, that it diverts money to systems other than your roads, where you don't get to decide what you need most as a city. And then again, the actions that the county has recently taken, I think, demonstrates some problems in that bill, that we do continue to put counties in the place of being the inefficient middleman, the flow through, that then we're in a position, you are in a position of going and begging the county, begging COG, begging other entities to prioritize your needs. I don't think that makes for great government.
Is that much different than what it is already?
I'm sorry?
Is that much different than how it is right now?
I really don't think the county should have as much influence over your local policies and your local needs as it does.
Okay. And then a follow-up on that, are there parts in Senate Bill 136 that you were in support of, even though you voted against the entire bill?
I think, well, generally the sales tax, which is the overarching and underpinning piece of this, I can't support. So anything else that becomes a piece of that is moot to me.
Okay, thank you. And then for Cameron, on this bill, one of the things that the league helped do was get rid of that stick that was there, and the carrot's still there. So I want to thank you for getting rid of that. That was a big part of the bill that would be detrimental to cities. So we appreciate you coming forth and getting that. So my question for you is, and it's been addressed some, but I'd like to hear your thought on that. If West Jordan chooses to not support this bill, what funds, and if it passes, what funds will West Jordan be able to see? Will we see an increase to our transportation if this bill passes, but we vote against it? Not the bill, I mean the tax.
Yep. Before I answer that, I just want to acknowledge the sticks thing that you brought up earlier. For the other members of the council and others who are watching, at one point, part of the discussion last summer was the state withholding some of the gas tax revenues that cities are entitled to receive based on the state disagreeing with the local land use planning. That's where we started last year. And we were successful at pushing back against that provision, and it never actually made it into a draft of SB 136 after months of hard work. So thank you for that acknowledgement. If West Jordan chooses not to pass a resolution, and the threshold of 67% is nevertheless reached, come July 1, 2019, when the 40-40-20 goes into effect, West Jordan will receive by statute $1.7 million. Those are the projections as of today, so that number can change somewhat, but approximately $1.7 million annually going forward out of that fourth quarter, and that would be West Jordan's allocation of the 40%. And that's based in a combination on your population and based on where the sales is consummated, the point of sale. Over the next few months between now and June 30th of 2019, there would be a COG process, and it's not my place to say which projects would get funded. I don't know which projects would get funded. It would go through the COG process, or the process that Salt Lake County would create and solicit applications. One key component of SB 136 is how the state is going to fund transportation projects going forward. One thing that Representative Coleman mentioned that I think is really spot on is this idea of weighing the value of different transportation projects and multimodal projects. Going forward under SB 136, transit projects will be eligible for state dollars, but they will be weighed on their merits. And so you actually will have a better process going forward of how the state is going to look at state transportation projects. And they may look at this road, or they may look at this transit component or combination thereof, and they'll be weighing those all together. And we thought that was good policy to be able to have that discussion. From a transit perspective, just on a side note, I actually took the train here today because I was curious to see how long it would take to get here from downtown where the league office is located. So took the train here today and walked over City Hall, and I think it's a great asset to have this close to City Hall. But hopefully that answers your question about what would happen to the funds if the county imposes a tax regardless of what happens in this meeting today.
Thank you. Mayor, I have some more questions, but I will hold them off to see if they get asked by others, and then I'll come back perhaps.
Okay, Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you both for being here this evening and for your comments. I've got a couple questions, and I think you answered it, Cameron, then I've got a little comment, but the funding on the sales tax, that is based on population or the percentage of sales tax that the city generates? We talk a lot about the 40-40-20, but no one's ever said if it's based on population or it's based on the amount of sales tax that we generate in the city.
Councilmember, I'm glad you brought this up. This goes back to House Bill 362, and we spent weeks deliberating over this piece. The local option 1% sales tax that West Jordan imposed back in the 80s, that is the only general sales tax that the legislature has authorized all cities in the state to impose. It's the 1%. That 1%, based on this long-standing compromise within the league, divides money according to both population and point of sale. So in West Jordan's case, you are a sales tax hub. You look at Jordan Landing and other areas, and as the city continues to grow, you'll see that point of sale continue to increase. And your population is increasing. So as your population increases, your population compared to the rest of the state continues to grow, so therefore your share of that local option will continue to grow. That 50-50 formula applies to the 40% city piece within House Bill 362 and SB 136. So the 50-50 formula applies to our 40% within the 40-40-20.
Okay, thank you for that. And then going with what Representative Coleman had indicated, the voters have already spoken on this, and I believe the consensus was as long as UTA was receiving funding, it was going to be a no vote. So I am a little perplexed as to why it's back up, and I'm also perplexed as to why the Salt Lake County Council would push this to the 16 cities within Salt Lake County, because it does kind of pit us all against each other. Our city could vote no or could vote yes, another city could vote yes, other cities could vote no. As soon as that 67%, the voice that we have is eliminated, regardless of how we vote, whether we vote yes or whether we vote no. So that perplexes me a little bit. I also don't feel like I have the authority to impose a tax on residents that I don't have a legislative interest in that body, such as UTA or Salt Lake County for regional infrastructure. You know, my vote is for West Jordan. My vote is not for Salt Lake County. My vote is not for UTA. I don't have any say. If this council voted in support of Senate Bill 136, I don't know that that gives this city any additional weight with Salt Lake County, maybe, or any additional say with UTA, as in, can we have better service? Can we have increased bus? Can we have a bus rapid transit? Can we, me supporting it does not give UTA any more ability to solve transportation issues in West Jordan. Is the way I say it. That's more of a commentary than a question. The other question I have, and I could probably end with this one, is you mentioned, Cameron, that the county portion goes away, if it doesn't happen, there's like an automatic, the state says it automatically goes into play regardless of what any city votes. But it's only 50-50. The county is essentially blocked out. So we can receive additional money if we wait.
Yeah, let me clarify how the use it or lose it component works. And I'm glad Representative Coleman clarified earlier, because there was a previous version of the bill where the state would impose the tax if the local governments did not. And we did successfully lobby to take that piece out. Instead, it's now use it or lose it. And the use it or lose it functions this way. If come July 1, 2020, Salt Lake County has not imposed the tax, then you as a legislative body have the authority to impose the full quarter-cent within the boundaries of West Jordan City. If that happens, half the money goes into the city, the city formula, the 50-50 formula, and half of it goes to UTA for service within the county. No money at that time would be diverted to the county. Where it gets complicated is, let's say July 1, 2020 arrives, and July 2nd, West Jordan says we're imposing this tax, and South Jordan says we're imposing this tax, and just the two of you act. And then in August of that year, Salt Lake County says, well, we reconsider, we want to impose it. You're locked in. They cannot come claw back the money from the residents of West Jordan and the taxpayers in West Jordan. The county can still impose it in the rest of the county. Both of those authorities end in 2022. So if come June 30th, 2022, and the county has not acted, and the cities have not acted, then that authorization just goes away. The one thing I'll add about the other counties that passed Prop 1 within the UTA service district is we as an organization and city leaders around the transit district challenged UTA to explain how they would be using that additional .10 in Davis and Weber counties. And so UTA put together a dashboard demonstrating where each penny was being spent within those counties and took feedback from local governments in order to reinvest that money. Will there be a formal process for how UTA spends this new .40 that could come out of the quarter-cent you're considering today? The answer to that question is up in the air, because the board of directors is changing, the reform is underway, and UTA is not statutorily guaranteed a dime through June 30th of 2019, in large part to allow these reforms to take place first and to start to build some credibility and trust within the agency.
May I respond? So in other words, there is no scenario under this bill where you get to prioritize the funding for the system that you need for your citizens.
Yep. So within the 40% that West Jordan would receive, that is your money, no strings attached.
And it seems to me, though.
But you don't have a choice to ever not have some of those funds, to not have those funds diverted to UTA. Under either scenario, you don't get a choice.
Yep, that's true.
Okay, let me just interject here that we would like to go for about another 5 minutes.
Okay,
because we've got a lot to talk about tonight, and so.
I'll be done. I appreciate that. If I choose to support something like this, my expectation would be that UTA has some very large ears to hear. Thank you. That's all I have.
Councilmember Whitelock.
Just one quick question. I have some data that was sent to me earlier by city manager, secretary, actually. Cameron, you might know the answer. In West Jordan, this tells me Bluffdale, Draper, Harriman, and Riverton on Prop 1, what the numbers were. Do you happen to know what the numbers were for West Jordan?
Recognizing that they are approximate and based on projections. I'm quite certain it's 1.7, but let me just make sure I quote it correctly.
What I'm referring to, Cameron, is the vote from Prop 1 back in the day.
Oh, okay, sorry. The voter, I believe it was 38% in support and 62% in opposition of the voters within West Jordan City on Prop 1.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just have one quick question, probably for Cameron. Is this a sales tax on everything, or is it a specific sales tax on certain items?
It is a sales tax on everything that is in the general sales tax base, so it excludes food.
Okay. Thank you both for coming.
All those services
And-
aren't in the base. Yeah.
Thank you both for coming and taking the time to visit with us and answer our questions this evening. We really appreciate that.
Yep. Thank you.
Can I give Cameron some props too, real quick? Do you mind? So we did sit through hours and hours and hours of these meetings, and I, especially when it came to your local land use authority, he was very protective of that for you. So I just wanted to give him props in the league for that.
Thank you very much. We'll turn the time back over to our city manager, Mr. Bricky.
I think at this point, this mic is working, is it not? If I
You don't want
can.
two mics?
What's that?
You don't want two mics?
I love two mics, but I'm going to give Mr. Wong one back because he might be asked a question.
Okay.
At this point, if I could, for at least those who might be tuning in and watching, they would like to probably understand why I'm going to ask the next series of questions or events to take place. Previously, the council set up subcommittees in the following 5 areas: administration, chaired by Mayor Jim Riding; public safety, chaired by Councilperson Dirk Burton, development and legal, chaired by Zach Jacob; the enterprise fund, chaired by Alan Anderson; and the infrastructure, chaired by Chad Lamb. They've met previously on no less than 2 occasions. It may have been maybe short 2 occasions, but at least 2 previous occasions in which the staff have presented the budget, explained their needs and their requests. They have now submitted to me their green sheets. I went through and have forwarded to you those green sheets. What I'd ask now is for the public to hear from each of those chairs just a brief summary of what their impressions of that subcommittee meeting was, and if they thought the process that they've come to see what the city's asking in those areas is appropriate, or if you think there is, in fact, a need for a tax increase or further cutting. I think putting us as department heads all on notice as to what your thoughts are is appropriate, because as we come to the conclusion of this meeting, if we are in fact going to ask for a truth in taxation, I'd like the public to know exactly what it is that you're going to be considering. So if I could turn the time over to just proceeding in the way I've described it earlier, Mayor Riding to talk about the administration, and then proceed to the next person after that.
Thank you. When our committee met, it was involving the finance and the following departments within the city. Finance, the Office of the City Manager, operations including PIO, HR, and risk management, IT, city clerks, and economic development. And as we went through and listened to the department heads as they discussed their budgets for the coming year, and let me just point out too that we had council members Jacob and Whitelock also on this committee, so we were able to hear from these department heads regarding each of these items. And it's interesting, in the administration, they had not requested any what we call green sheet items, which are items that were requested that are above and beyond the normal budgeting process. During the budget meetings, the questions I think were asked and answered, and I'll take this moment, I think, to give a little bit of time to Councilmember Jacob and Councilmember Whitelock to address any administration items that they feel like they need to at this time, or if you feel like everything was good, then great, we're just moving on to the next item. Next one. So if either of you have any comments on the budget items of that? Okay, I think with that, the next one on the list would be
Public Safety and Chairman Dirk Burton.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I wasn't really prepared to address this either, but I will say that the information we received from public safety and their needs are very important to the city of West Jordan, and I want to thank Councilman Whitelock and Councilman Lamb for their participation in the committee. And as for how functional this is, I will tell you when we finish our budget process and I see how it all pans out when it's all completed. I like what I have learned, but I'd like to learn from the other committees where they are and see how it all comes together as we put the budget together. So I'm not quite there yet. Is there anything that either of you want to say as far as the Public Safety Committee goes? I said police, but I also want to include fire department in that.
I would like to say it was an eye-opener for me to meet personally with the departments. You know, I think, I've talked to Chris a little about this, it was a little bit difficult because there were only 3 of the council members on these budget committees. So there were 4 of us that didn't get to see these meetings, and I wish there was a way that all 7 of us could have been in all of those meetings. I'm sure there is a way. It'll be a lot more planning for next year, and obviously when all 7 of us are together, it's an open meeting as opposed to the regular meeting that we had there. But overall, I think the good thing about it is that we were able to meet with the police chief and the fire chief. They were able to present it to us, and I don't know if that's been done in the past straight to the council. So I'd like that portion of it because it gave me, Dirk, and Kayleen an opportunity to meet with them, look at what the green sheets were, look at what the budgets were, and understand how we can help out. Because in the end, it all comes down to how much money's in that budget, and is there enough money to add on what they don't have already. So there's a portion of the part I liked about it, but at the same time, I felt that, you know, the others didn't get a chance to really dig into it like the 3 of us did with public safety.
Thank you. Then Development and Legal's Chair is Zach Jacob, and I'd ask for his comments.
Well, thank you. Briefly, I enjoyed this meeting because it was easy. Development and Legal didn't ask for much, so I appreciate that from you guys. There's one green sheet on the legal department that was for a software that is almost necessary to be updated. There's the current, I don't remember what it's called, but yeah, go ahead.
It's called eProsecutor. It will be the replacement for PIMS,
Right.
which has been the software that cities have used for about 10 years now.
That's right. If it was made by Apple, it would have been iProsecutor, but it's eProsecutor. The old system is no longer being supported by the manufacturer of that system. So if we choose not to approve the green sheet for the new system, then excuse me, then we're going to be kind of on our own should anything crash with the old system. So just something to keep in mind on that. There was a couple of personnel requests. Code enforcement's looking for another couple officers. And in the prosecutor's office, there was a part-time to a full-time administrative assistant and an additional prosecutor. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I was just looking through the
potentially
green sheets
to
that are
be
online.
either full-time or part-time, with maybe a part-time and the other part of that salary being used for a paralegal, depending
Right.
on when eProsecutor rolls out what we perceive the needs to be once that's up and running.
Right, okay. Thank you. And I think some of these are more urgent than others. For example, the additional personnel, we have to wait and see what the new software does and where it saves time and where it doesn't, and where the new personnel need to come into play before we really know what the need is there. So some things to consider on that. So I'll leave that as my comments in those meetings as well, if you've got anything you want to add.
Yeah, I'll add my takeaway from the legal and development services. I think development services didn't have any requests and are running pretty well, from what I could gather. In the legal, I do think there might be, we have to get the software first, but I think there might be some human resource capital that could be saved with the new eProsecutor. So I'm supportive of that process on the green sheet. Overall, those two felt like they were doing what we needed for the benefit of our residents.
Thank you. And if we can now move to the Enterprise Fund and its chair, Alan Anderson. I should indicate in the Development Legal, the other members of that were Alan Anderson and Chris McConaughey. In the Enterprise Fund, Mayor Jim Riding, Dirk Burton, and the chair, Alan Anderson. If we could hear from Chair Anderson on the Enterprise Fund issues.
Thank you. First of all, I want to appreciate you, David, in getting us the budget in April and having time to go through this and setting up these meetings. Overall, I felt it beneficial. I looked at it more as a 30,000-foot view on systems and processes and things that we do. So I don't want to be critical of staff. I think they're doing a great job, and I think it's more systems. Some of the concerns that I had is it seemed like, at least to me, that we went with, how do I want to say this? We didn't look at all the scenarios first. We looked at easy scenarios or easier scenarios to solve issues or tasks. And I'd like us to, I'd like to see if, we've got some really smart people that work in this city, and I think we can come up with alternative solutions to tasks rather than hiring people. That doesn't mean that we don't need to hire people. I'm looking at it from a task perspective. Here's a task, and here's a solution to a task, and that's the only solution that's presented. There might be other solutions. One of the things that came up that we discussed is with the new contract for solid waste. It was proposed that there be what I would consider a large increase in our solid waste fee that's on our residents' utility bills. And so going with this idea that we have tasks and we keep doing easy solutions, I thought, well, what are some other options? Could we change how we're doing the dumpster program? Can we change green waste? Can we change recycle? I mean, what other options are out there that are hard decisions? And I'm not saying that they're easy decisions, but I'm looking for those decisions where it's not, well, we just have to raise it by a double-digit % increase because that's the new contract. I would rather say, here's some solutions where it's a minimal increase and we're going to have to make these adjustments because we're impacting people. So overall, it was very enlightening to me. I didn't attend public work or public safety. I wasn't on that committee, but I know that there's some stressors on crime and, well, just public safety in general. But basically, that was my feeling with Enterprise Fund, which covers the water, it covers the sewer, the storm drain, which we've talked about a few times. I still am desirous to have a 5-year water rate plan. I think that would be beneficial for our residents and beneficial for our businesses that are here, where they have some predictability in their budgeting based on our water rates. And I've talked with a couple other council members about what I'd like to see with water. Let's see, what else did we have? We had water, sewer, public works, roads, solid waste we kind of talked about. What's that? Parks? Yeah, and parks, and we probably need to do something. I had a resident actually explain today, they asked a question about why our parks seem to be on a 2-week mowing cycle, and I've talked with Brian about that, and he indicated that, or no, I talked to Dave, sorry, that it's basically staffing.
And I did ask the department heads that had answered those types of questions to come today. So if there is a question that you want to ask, please ask it. They're here to provide that kind of insight. So if I could ask Mr. Naylor to answer that question.
I've already asked him, and I've got my question. So everybody wants more people. Well, I wish I had answers that were give everybody their people. We have to find a balance, I think, between providing a service for a reasonable expectation of cost to the residents. So, and I don't know if the mayor, if you had anything from the enterprise fund.
Well, I had a couple of things, but, and I think anytime we come up with a question about how can we not raise the fee and do something else, I think it would be helpful if we had suggestions for staff that are reasonable suggestions that can, if you want to take a look at eliminating the green waste dumpster program, or the dumpster program entirely, I think that saves the city about $500,000 a year, roughly. But everybody in the city uses those things, and it would tend to make a lot of stuff stack up on the streets that would not be very pleasing to the eye. And so I think that, you know, if there's a good viable solution to not raising the fee on our garbage pickup, I think staff would love to hear it. The other couple of things, though, too, that there was a couple of green sheet items that I think are for enterprise funds that are listed: a security camera for each water site, and I think that's kind of an important issue. And these are on the city manager's approved green sheet list, because if you took the whole green sheet list, there's like 8 million plus on there, and he's pared it down to 3 million plus. There's a trailer-mounted bypass pump that's necessary, and a 10-wheel dump truck for the storm drain crew, repair crew. So on the enterprise funds, I think those are very needed items that need to be included in the green sheet process. So as we go through the evening and we look at all of these green sheet items, so there's going to be questions about how do we fund those, and this is where I think the truth and taxation question is going to have to come up to be able to answer these questions. And so, but that's all I had regarding.
Yeah, and I wasn't saying that we should make the decision of whether we change green waste or dumpsters. Those are things that should be looked at. We have an ability in the city through Qualtrics to survey residents and find out what they desire. If the residents desire dumpsters and green waste pickup, then by all means, then we know what our answer is. But I don't know that we should be doing this blindly.
I totally agree. But we need to have a suggestion, because without a suggestion, I get kind of people will say to me, well, or I'll say, why don't we do this? And they'll say that won't work. But they don't give me an alternative that will work. And that's the thing I get kind of frustrated about sometimes is we hear a lot of what won't work, but nobody will tell us what will work. And so I would love to hear suggestions, and I'm sure staff would love to hear suggestions if we want to try to not raise, let's just say, the garbage waste fee. What can we do? What can we do? Rather than say, let's not do it. Well, somehow we have to pay for it. And so I would rather have options out there that says this is what we can do in relation to this particular item.
Right,
So,
I'm agreeing with you, and I think those are some of the decisions that I think need to be made by staff, our very qualified staff, to do some of this analysis of data, because if solid waste fees going to go 25% and the residents don't want 25%, then we need to have alternatives.
I really like your answer, your comment about putting a survey out there, because there's some very smart people out there that live in our city, and I would love to hear what others think about ways in which, if we know we have a cost that's coming to us and we have to pay that, what options do we have to cover that cost?
Correct.
So, you know, I agree. A survey, it would be a great thing to put out there. You know, when it comes right down to it, if we don't get any answers, then we have to decide what we want to do. It comes right down to that.
Yep, and that's those are my thoughts on enterprise fund, and I was on enterprise and development and legal, and it was very enlightening to me and very helpful for me to attend those meetings and look at it more globally. So I just want to thank you for that, Mr. Brickey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
I should probably chime in and share from my perspective what I learned from the subcommittee, and well, I'll add it after we hear from the last subcommittee on infrastructure, and Chair Lamb, who was members included Mayor Riding and Chris McConaughey, but then if I can just add my 2 cents as it pertains to the department heads after you've presented your findings or impressions of the subcommittee's meetings.
Thank you. Just like in the other committee I was in with police and fire, this meeting also was an eye-opener to, sit down and talk with the heads of the departments to find out what was needed. I've been involved with Brian and Parks for a few years now, and I know what they need. And so now, as a council member, to sit down and discuss it more and to understand better, why the parks need that. I think the one thing that we got from at least this group was years ago there was a cut in employees, and we've never gotten back up to that cut. Can we get back up to those numbers that we had before? I don't know at this juncture or in this meeting today, but it would be nice to look into that and see what the possibilities are. I've probably been one person that's been against adding fees to our utility bill to add on to parks, just because I don't think it should be a fee. I think it should be something that's in our taxes and put in there and in our budget, not an additional fee. I really worry about using that utility bill as a fee for everything that we want, and that we can just go out and add fees, and we could get up to $200 in fees, and the citizens, all they can do is say stop. So, but from this group, and Mayor Ryan was with me on the first one, and Councilmember McConaughey wasn't able to make to that one that night. But I think what we learned from that is there are a lot of needs in all of these areas, both infrastructure, parks, and in capital works. And I think the biggest one was employees. Do you agree with that one?
I do, and if you look at the list that's out there of green sheet items that the city manager has approved, it's kind of amazing to think that it started out $8+ million, and he's whittled it down to just $3+, and yet that $3 million is still not funded, and that we're looking at things that are very necessary for our city. These aren't things that are gosh, it'd be nice to have a new pair of shoes, whatever. It's things that are very needed and necessary. And sometimes we have a hard time trying to make everything work. And when it comes down to not having the funding to do what we need to do, then we need to decide what is it we don't want to do. Do we not want to repair this street out here? Or do we not want to hire more police officers that we need? As our city continues to grow, and we grow, 2,000 to 3,000 more people every year, but we're not adding the resources to take care of the new streets, the new neighborhoods, the people. We need to kind of stay up with all that. One day, in the not too distant future, we'll be the 3rd largest city, and yet we don't seem to be changing with our resources and needs to take care of our city like it should be. I go to other cities and I see places that look beautiful. Why is that? What's the difference? Is it because they have more resources than what we do? If it is, then we need to figure out what we can do to try to, I think I'm kind of on my soapbox here, and I think I need to turn it back over to you and say, but thank you for.
No, thank you for being part of that. And I don't have any other comments at this time, but I want to thank all those that were part of this committee and the directors that came and presented to us, and know that, I always like to say me as a citizen of West Jordan, I like to take the council member hat off and say that, as a citizen, I want all of these entities to have what they need, but sometimes budget doesn't allow us. We have to find the best ways to use that budget so that we can make everything work great. So thank you.
Thank you. If my observation could be shared at this point, it would be and I will. I came to work here 2 years ago, and I was very fortunate to be hired when I was under a different administration. What I can tell you is that you have a staff that is getting by on as little as tax collection as I've ever seen. The last time there was a tax increase was almost 6 years ago. You have a park department that was depleted as a result of the very real economic downturn that we all faced, but they are still getting by with what they have. The budgets that were presented to those 5 subcommittees and argued by these department heads can be paid. We can go forward tonight. I'm confident telling you, with the numbers that were shared with you, we have the income to pay for those 5 areas. The budgeted green sheet items that were submitted, those $8 million requests, and I really appreciate having heard from different members of the council the same statement. The city staff and its crew has to tighten its belt and do as best they can. These items, this $8 million that's being requested, is not frivolous. It's not an extra pair of Nikes when I already have a pair. It is law enforcement, it's fire, it's inspectors. It's a bare minimum that we whittled down to. When I first sent out the green sheet, it was, I think I suggested it was 2.4 million, and I invited department heads to review it, and if they saw mistakes or something that I should consider, to come see me, and a couple did. And so now that item in that request is actually jumped up from 2.4 to 2.9, and I'll be the first to acknowledge that. And some of the rationale we can explain if you want, but that was why clear back on May 4th, we sent the slide presentation that Bill Piper and his staff put together explaining the 10%, 20%, or 30% tax increase and what you would get from that increase. In this instance, I can tell you just today, I was at a manager meeting with a large number of the managers from around Salt Lake Valley. Just last year in one city, they did a 47% increase, tax increase. Another city has already implemented a 30% increase, and then every year after that 30% increase, which I believe was 6 years ago, they put in a cost of living increase annually, and they just plan on having a truth in taxation meeting every year to cover that cost of living increase. I think this city is on the verge of being a much bigger city. We are currently the 3rd largest. I think that the next census, we may actually move to a position above that, above 3rd place. And if there is any indication of what potentially could happen in our southwest quadrant as observed yesterday, there is a very good chance we could inherit 30,000 residents overnight. So if that's the case, dealing with this year makes sense, because next year is going to be a real challenge as we move forward into adjusting for a new form of government. I dare say that it's going to take real courage on your part, all 7 of you, to make a decision. Are we going to address the issue of a tax increase or not? And if we are, is the amount going to be 10, 20, 25, 30%? If you do a 25% or something similar to that, you will pay for all the green sheet items I've requested. That's 5 additional police officers. It's 9 additional firefighters. These are individuals who are going to add a layer of protection and service to the city. So that's where I, at this point, wanted to take us. I don't know if the department heads need to stay at this point. I wanted them here to answer questions, but this next part going forward is you literally telling me how this policy and how you would like to proceed. So I will let them know that if they have family matters, and you haven't been asked a question now, you can leave. But if you want them to stick around, they will. That's how dedicated they are. Some of them have put aside family matters to be here tonight. But if I can approach and hand you out the general fund summary for the last 2 years, I think, Bill, is what you prepared. Let me grab my glasses. 16, 17, 17, 18, and then next year, 18, 19. Behind it, you'll see some of those adjustments that I mentioned a minute ago in the green sheet. So if I can just, actually, if I could ask Joel.
Mayor, I have a couple of green sheet questions, if now's a good time to do that before the staff leaves.
I think that's probably, Dirk has a couple of questions, City Manager, for, regarding green sheet items. So is this a good opportunity time to do that before the staff leaves?
Absolutely. I think if you have a question for the green sheet, and I've got the department head here, let's ask them and explain the justification, rationale behind them.
Okay.
Perfect. Now, I think if anyone else on the council also has green sheet questions, let's address them now while we're doing them all at the same time. So, Councilmember Burton, if you want to begin.
Thank you, Mayor. My first question is on parks, the 50,000 for the trailer. I was under the understanding that we had some money set aside for a shed out there, and since the trailer is taking the place of the shed, can we transfer that money that we had set aside for that shed and use for the trailer?
The problem, we look into that, but the problem with that concept is it's bond money. The bond money was specifically approved for parks improvement, and it'd be very hard to justify that a trailer is a parks improvement.
Okay, so the next question I have while you're here on parks, on the playground, we've got some money for you requested some money for the playground. The city manager didn't put that in there. Was that playground for this playground in this park?
No, the playground that was in that was for Lone View. There's a small park up in Lone View. Residents continually requested playground in that, and so we decided to submit in the green sheets to try to fulfill the residents' desires for that.
Okay, so then carrying back, since we're not building that shed over there, and we had some money set aside for the playground, but it's not enough for the playground, are you planning on taking that other bond money from that shed and add it to the playground to increase the playground amount, or what are you doing with the extra bond money?
Some of the conversation we've had with that, there's $60,000 allocated over there. Some of those have been subjects of putting back into that baseball facility with some surfacing, concrete surfacing. Right now there's asphalt surfacing that is severely degrading, and we were going to try to put some of that money back into that facility because that's where the money was allocated for. Even though they didn't get the concessions, we felt like we should still have an obligation to put the money back into that facility. And there's still a need over there in that facility.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Councilmember Whitelock.
Probably more of a statement than a question. One of the items, Mr. Bricky, that you've got down here, it's a division number 2101. It's police traffic. I shared this with you personally, but I'd like to share it with the public. I just, when I look at where we want to focus our funds for the police department, traffic is not where I want our funds focused. I want it focused on working towards their retirement so we're a little more competitive with our neighboring cities, and narcotics, because I think narcotics causes more problems for our residents than traffic. So that one really troubles me because I don't think it's the best use of tax dollar.
If I can answer just a little bit, since the subcommittee meetings, we've now met with members of the police FOP on 2 occasions. I know the chiefs met with them several other times. They have several suggestions that we were working through as ways of retaining those officers that we currently have. We have a fairly large number of Tier 1 and Tier 2 was created in 2011. And there's an obvious need to make sure those Tier 2 officers that were hired after that date feel wanted and appreciated. So what happened was the initial 7 ideas that were propagated, I should say, was actually new money, but it didn't get put in on a green sheet. It actually came in as a white sheet, and since it wasn't, it was in fact new money, it got pulled. I have committed to the FOP, to the chief, to continue to work on the ideas that were in that sheet. And the reality is some of them I can't. I've already told them I cannot comply with some of those requests. But others I think are very fair. We're going to be in a situation very soon. Harriman City is going to be hiring at least 32 officers very soon. There's all kinds of rumors floating about what Harriman City's going to offer. We want to keep our officers who are loyal and have knowledge about this city, but the reality is if they have kids, they have mortgages, and they have bills to pay, they will go where they can get paid more. And or there's a larger retirement or security. I know the chief's committed to that, and if I could ask him to make any additional comments as well.
Yeah, our whole goal is obviously to retain the officers we have. There's got to be a balance there of the wages as well as retention. Looking at the traffic funds that he has on the green sheet, I'm sure a lot of you folks have driven in West Jordan in the afternoon, and what a traffic mess it can be. We want to use these funds to concentrate on the crossings in the morning and also in the afternoons. And we also need these funds to handle the accidents and the fatalities and stuff that come in when we're having to call officers out to handle those things. Just increase the traffic, increase the folks out on the road that we need to help to try to fund that we can cover these things. So.
I still favor narcotics officers over traffic officers. My last ticket was decades ago, okay? But I still favor narcotics over traffic. I just think that the issues that are impacting most of our residents are related to narcotics, not to the guy speeding, so.
Yes, and in some aspects I do agree with you on that, is that the narcotics do affect a lot of different areas in the city with theft and everything like that. The problem that we're running with the narcotics right now is that the staffing levels we're at, we're not able to staff our narcotics at the level that we have set. So that's some of the issues we're running into, but we're moving forward with that, and we're hoping to get that staffed here pretty soon.
Because we can't get the manpower? Is that why we can't staff it?
We do have a lot of people hired right now. The problem is they're in different phases of training. They're either in the police academy, or they're either in our FTO training, or we've just hired them. And so trying to get them, it takes quite a long time to get somebody on the road after we hire them. It takes 8-9 months before they're on the road if they're a brand new officer. If we can get lateral transfers, we can typically obviously get them on the road quite faster. But if we have to hire somebody new, it takes 8 to 9 months before we can actually get them on the road and in a car.
Yeah, that's understandable. That's just my desire.
Yeah.
Let me just interject something right here too. You mentioned that we were looking for 5 new officers. Harriman's probably going to be looking for 34 or something like that. I attended Salt Lake City's City Council meeting last night, where they are talking about hiring in the next budget year 50 officers for Salt Lake City. So there's a lot of folks out there that we don't want to lose right now that are working for West Jordan. So I think from our standpoint, we would really like to see our officers stay. So Councilmember Anderson.
Yeah, I just had a question for Chief Davis. You had mentioned on this traffic line item that dealt with crossing. Is that crossing guard pay, or is it something else, or just being able to staff our crossing guards for schools?
No, that's a different item. What this is to get the officers into the crossings in the busy time, obviously when the crossing guards are out crossing children. We use these to have an officer in the morning and an officer in the afternoon to stick them in the different crossings to enforce the traffic laws, so that kids aren't getting hit and stuff like that. And then we also use them for the rest of the time out in the heavy traffic areas to enforce traffic in the other heavy traffic areas of the city.
Okay, and are these is there another green sheet that is specific for crossing guards? Are we I guess, understaffed with crossing guards? We're not able to retain them?
Yes, there is. The city manager has placed in their additional compensation for the crossing guards as well. So that's a different item.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
In fact, at this point, we do have the department heads here, and maybe those that have something they could share with the council. I'm going to put Mr. Wall on the spot and see if those green items, the e-prosecutor, I know that there's some influx reality about whether or not the e-prosecutor will require additional work from staff. Can you please explain to the council why the technology may actually require additional work or more people to help?
I'd be happy to. Can Can I come up there?
Yes, please.
I'd much rather be able to see all of you and you be able to see me. Yeah, maybe this is also something that would not just pertain to the legal department, but also give you some additional comfort, or maybe prompt some other questions in your mind. I just wanted to give you one example that Councilmember Jacob brought up on the discussion that we had about the new software. This software is something that is going to be implemented by most of the large cities in the state that do misdemeanor prosecution in cities. And as he mentioned, the current software will not be supported beyond this January. And it's slowly becoming more and more problematic. The software that's being purchased is from a very good company. There was a statewide RFP done. When I mean statewide, it was done by the Utah Prosecution Council. And they looked at software that's used in a number of companies from around the country. This one that's selected is actually located in Utah and has been used by a number of county attorney offices, both in Utah and outside Utah. And it is going to give a real boost to not only our office in terms of the detail and the accuracy of cases that are being filed, but it's also going to give, hopefully, our prosecutors and paralegals more time to do what they really ought to be doing besides shuffling papers. The reason that I'm suggesting the additional funding for what's equivalent to a prosecutor is very simply this. The city I came from automated its own system and wrote part of its own software itself. And just to give you some perspective, they're currently able to do with 2 prosecutors and 1 paralegal what would take them 3 prosecutors and another paralegal and maybe 3.5 prosecutors. What that's done for them is not necessarily given them the freedom to then decrease staff, but I want to give you a couple of examples. One of the things that I've noticed here in just the 6 weeks or so I've been here is that the prosecutors here, the caseload here, first of all, let me tell you, in reviewing the Administrative Office of the Court Statistics, so these aren't our numbers, these are numbers that the state court administrator gave us. The prosecution staff here prosecutes almost 100 cases per prosecutor more per year than any other prosecutor office in the Valley. That's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, it's just a statistic. But let me tell you something that I've noticed. There are a number of things that our prosecutors are not doing that they really should do to give our residents the best service that they frankly should expect from our prosecutors and from our court. A couple examples. Domestic violence cases are very, very time-consuming and very, very difficult. We had a situation, I'll give you an anecdote just as an example, last month where one of our prosecutors spent 3 hours with a victim, female victim, trying to help her understand that it was worth it to her to take the risk to testify against her spouse. And that is not an uncommon problem because there's such fear in the minds of these victims. Now, we have victim advocates that do a lot of that, and I must tell you, not only in this city but around this state, the Victim Advocate Program is a real blessing to cities and residents. Our victim advocates do a great job. There's simply certain things because of their lack of having a law degree and legal training that they can't help victims feel comfortable with. Unfortunately, because of the caseload of our prosecutors, it is not common that they're able to spend 2 or 3 hours with a victim like this particular prosecutor did on this particular day. And the reason she did that was because it's the severity of the case and the commitment that the prosecutor and the officers who were involved had to making sure this case was prosecuted. We can't do that frequently. It's very rare that they can spend the time doing that because of the caseload. So even though we're going to implement this new software, this is one example of where I'm hoping not only will this software free up some administrative time, but independent of that, there is a need. Let me give you another example. About 5 years ago, the state of Utah passed legislation that ostensibly would allow prosecutors to deal with pedestrian safety issues where there are citizens, residents collecting money in the right-of-way, panhandlers. There's not a city prosecutor in this state who at this point is willing to use that statute to prosecute panhandling because frankly, and I've done my own research on it and I agree, I don't think it's constitutional. And one of the challenges that we face at the legislature is a lot of times when they give us tools as they think, and they're researched actually by the Attorney General's office or the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel, they face the same challenge we do. They have to give legal opinions in a very short time period, and they don't have a chance to do the kind of research they need to do. Another city I represented was having a very, very severe panhandling problem that was truly public safety related. We were unwilling to take a case up and be the test case to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees wondering if we'd win. Well, because of the prosecution staffing that the city had and the automation in place, I was able to tell the city prosecutor, take the next 2 weeks, and he did. It took him about 80 hours, and come up with an ordinance, because I got a mandate from the city council, fix this problem in those 2 locations. We were able to do that, and we were able to give that prosecutor essentially 2 weeks off of prosecuting. The others picked up the caseload, and he was able to do this research. We then prosecuted a gentleman, obtained 3 convictions. It was appealed to the federal court. Because the city was so serious about the problem, I asked them to let me hire former Supreme Court Justice Michael Zimmerman to argue this case for us in front of the federal courts. We won in front of the most social activist judges on the bench right now in Utah, who is very anti-law enforcement and very anti-city. That case is now on appeal to the 10th Circuit, and I'm pretty confident they'll win that case. We can't do that here. We simply don't have the resources. I've had the prosecutors come to me twice, and the judge actually approached me since I've been here. There's another deficiency in our code where the judge doesn't have authorization to put vicious animals down, even where there's been a conviction. That may seem like a little thing, but there's some significant due process problems with doing that. And right now, I don't have the staff to be able to turn one of them loose to take a few days to research that constitutional issue and put an ordinance in place. And you say, well, why don't you just grab one from another city? Well, I could do that, but I can tell you, having represented a number of cities and also having taught at Post for 27 years, there are a lot of the city ordinances in the state dealing with the euthanasia of animals that are suspect. And particularly today where PETA is so active and there's such an activist element around that is well funded, I don't want to put this city in the position of having a judge issue orders based on our code when we haven't done our due diligence and done proper research. Another issue that the judge brought up, he mentioned it, and I appreciate him mentioning it because it doesn't sound as good coming from me when it's my staff. But I can tell you that there is a dearth of time that our prosecutors are spending with our police officers. They need to spend more time with them. I can tell you that as having taught cops for 27 years at Post and dealing with a number of police officers, that city prosecutors can be a huge resource to the police department in number 1, training. Number 2, developing a relationship with the officers so that when they go to court, there's a much better understanding of what the officer did on the street and the prosecutor understanding that better able to put on a case. And this is one that I can't quantify, but you can believe me if you want, and you don't have any reason to believe or not believe me, but I can tell you, having dealt with this issue for over 3 decades now, good relationships between prosecutors and police officers have a direct impact on personnel issues that arise or don't arise with police departments. And a lot of it have to do with the police department feeling like they have their backs, the attorneys have their backs, and are going to support them when they're on the street. That gives them less stress, which then leads to fewer personnel issues. Those are just some of the examples as to why I'm suggesting that you really should look serious about the funding for an additional prosecutor. I appreciate Councilmember Jacobs' comment about the timing. If you authorize this, We may not hire a full-time prosecutor. We may hire a part-time prosecutor, or take that funding and one of our part-time prosecutors will become full-time, devote the other part of that to hiring a paralegal, which can then, as another city has done, take some of the screening burden off of our prosecutors, which they have now. That person could screen those cases preliminarily, which every case has to be screened, and some of that time can be used by our prosecutors to do what only they can do. And adds the legal research, spending more time with victims, those sorts of issues. So I give you that as an example of why I think if you had the time and wanted to take the time, you could probably hear similar stories from every department and why they're asking for these personnel changes. There are stories, there is data behind it. But I wanted to answer that, and David, I don't mind you putting me on the spot. I can be the sacrificial lamb, that's great. Lawyers do that all the time. But anyway, thank you for letting me explain that. And whether it's persuasive or not, that's the story behind it. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
We do have, well, at least one. Councilmember Jacobs got a question.
Oh, thank you.
It's a very quick question, and then
Sure.
it's a question for Mr. Bricky.
Sure.
The question for you is, I don't see the software on the approved green sheet list.
It's actually
Blake, go ahead.
in the sheet that you were, sorry.
The one that I was emailed with the 3 million instead of the 8 million, that one?
That's correct. It's
not on
actually on the change to the tentative budget on the back of the sheet that we handed out. You'll see the e-prosecutor software change, victim advocate coordinator promotion.
So this is an additional 955,000 in
That
addition to
helped
the 3 million?
explain, Eric, jump in here if I'm making this incorrect. This is why it went from 2.4 to 2.9.
Those aren't the numbers that we've got.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The green sheets we have are 3 million, not 2.9 million.
Still can't hear. What did he say?
The green sheets are 3 million, not 2.9.
The green sheets that we have are, was it 3.1? 3.3.
And some of that is
3.28.
because some of the items are coming out of enterprise funds, as explained by Mr. Okerlund. If you could explain that difference, because that's the same question I posed to you.
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna need to do a little bit of clarification here. So this sheet that is showing on the screen now and was the second sheet that was distributed to you, this shows, I'll call them technical or generic changes to the ongoing budget, to the tentative budget that we adopted on May 9th. Okay, these, and this has been our practice in all the past years. You'll notice the first item says, revise the interfund charges. We go through a process where we refine the numbers that were in the original proposal, and then we have some things to add. The $55,000 on the fifth line down is the e-prosecutor software. So it is not in the green sheet process. There's two separate pots that are going on here. The green sheets are on the list that you have of the green sheets, and they're essentially tied to the funding issues. These changes are changes that we've said we need to make these changes, to have a better budget.
So are you making these changes to the green sheets or to what we should call the white sheets or the regular budget?
To the second, the white sheets, the regular budget.
The regular budget.
The green sheets are their own world. And
So the regular budget, it's a $298,000 decrease in the regular budget.
That's correct. The 3.4 is probably exactly because some of those one-time expenditures will need to be included. And that's why the 20%, I was looking at it, making a recommendation tonight of 20%, but it's probably given 3.4, it needs to be 25%. If this green sheet as presented with all of the additions that are listed here are to be improved.
now we also need to clarify The 3.4 million, whatever that green sheet total is in all the funds of the city. The 2.9 million that shows on the general fund summary is just the general fund portions. So we've got multiple funds that are involved.
And this is where I could probably ask the fire chief to step in and explain why the 9 officers are appropriate. I've also indicated in the green sheets and I don't want to mispronounce the SCBA's $676,051. We have applied for a grant. Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at the 9 individuals that are represented if in the green sheet. Sorry,
David?
It's 207,522. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you here because we have a couple council members that have some questions. So, Councilmember Anderson.
Okay, just on a point of clarification, Eric and Bill, so we're going to go back a couple minutes in time. This adjustment, go to the second page. So if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, we had the budget presented in end of April, beginning of May, separate from the green sheets. These are adjustments made to that budget. So we're seeing interfund charges, expenditures decreasing 158,000. We're seeing updates in city manager 35,000 off that budget. This doesn't really have a relationship to the green sheets. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can see here the total for the general fund, you know, underneath that first total line is only $5,100. The net change.
Correct.
So they're typically relatively minor. We do have one large one in the sewer fund.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of verbiage in there that kind of confused me a little bit. I just wanted to make sure that the original budget we had, these are the revisions to that original budget, and we still don't have the certified tax rate from the county, so are we using last year's actuals for projecting this year's property tax revenue? We haven't, like last year, if you remember, there was an assumption made by administration that it would be one number, and while we're actually in the meeting, the certified tax rate came in, and I can't remember what the number was. It was 400,000 less.
The number that we currently have is an estimate or a projection of what we think our tax number will be given from the county, accounting for new growth.
But more educated than last year. More educated projection than last year.
Yes, I'll agree.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
Councilmember Jacob.
Just one clarification on process. Are we planning on going through each department head and asking them all to justify all of their green sheets tonight? Because I thought that's what the subcommittee meetings were kind of for, is for those presentations and those discussions.
Again, they're here to answer those questions. If you'd rather not, and proceed forward with giving me a direction as to how to proceed, that's fine. But I wanted them here to explain if you had questions. If not, we can keep moving forward.
I appreciate it, and I would rather not have everybody have presentations again. I don't know, I don't speak for everybody, and I'm certainly not the chair of this meeting, but, you know, we all sat in meetings with all of you guys and heard the presentation. I appreciate Rob's rerun, though, because that was great for me, here at a second time. The other question I had was, these numbers that are on the screen right now, these are changes you would like us to make to the tentative budget that's already been adopted. We can't put these into the budget that we've already adopted without us approving it, right? This is requests, not...
They're requests, but the reality is they've already...
Because we've already adopted a tentative budget, and this number wasn't in it.
That's correct.
So if we don't come to any other conclusion, we fall back on that budget. This doesn't happen unless we adopt this as part of our budget.
Eric?
These are essentially proposed changes to that tentative budget that, assuming you got to next week and wanted to adopt a formal budget, we are recommending that you do these. You would not have to. If you said we don't want to do them, we wouldn't do them.
Right, okay. I just want that to be clear that this does not automatically add these numbers into the budget that we've already approved. This one that we've already approved, these don't automatically go in there because you're giving us a new sheet. We have to vote on this and approve this, just like we voted on this.
And that's why I wanted to get them earlier to you than later.
Right.
Would you? I don't think you would have appreciated being surprised on the night of the 13th with this information.
Right.
All right.
Thanks.
Councilmember Lamb.
All right, so to go off, Councilmember Zach Jacob, then comes Councilmember Zach. So the adopted budget that we approved is in my hand, $59,896,514. The one we were given tonight is $62,848,000. So it's a difference of $3 million. But the second page here is only $955,000. So where's the $3 million difference from our adopted budget? Can you answer that?
I can answer that. Okay, the purpose of this schedule right here, the general fund summary, and the number in the far right column down towards the bottom. Let me get this thing on. Right down there. And let me.
And the 2.9 is all of the green sheet requests.
That's the general fund green sheet requests.
Okay.
So that is intended to show, assuming we went with the city manager's recommended green sheets, that would need to be added to the budget, and that's where we would be at that point.
Okay, thank you.
And I think we'll take, unless anybody else has any objections, Councilmember Jacobs' recommendation that unless we have questions for department heads, let's not belabor this.
All right. In that case, I'll move forward to that email that I sent out in May 4th. I wanted to know if you had any questions about the recommendations that you can see in that of a 10%, 20%, or 30% tax increase. For comparison, we were looking at an average home of $255,000. That's what we've been identified as the average home value in this city. As a result, 10% reflects about $1.2 million, 20% doubles that at 2.4, 30% at 3.6. What does that increase look like? That would increase, if you do a 10% increase, it's $4.41 approximately. We've been trying to calculate what it looks like for other larger homes. We've seen increases if you have a home as much as valued at $400,000 plus, then the tax increase that you're going to see monthly is 10% is about $11.71. So you can imagine just going to a 20%, just double those amounts. So if it's 20%, it's and a smaller home, a $255,000 home, that would jump up to $8.82 monthly. So we're talking about a stop at a fast food chain, but you get $1.2 million for a 10%, or if you go to 20%, you've got $2.4 million, and as indicated in the general fund summary, the green sheets are $2.9 million. So, and that's just for real property. That's just the property increase. We still have the reality of also water, sewer, and storm drain issues that would have to be addressed. And then you also saw just last Wednesday night the issue of the licensing. If you increase your licensing fees across the board as recommended by Zion Bank, you can generate another 1.2 million. So tonight's meeting was to give me some direction if, by at least the property valuation, if there is an interest to do it. There may not be. I'm not suggesting how the 7 of you should vote. But you could give me some direction to help us get ready to explain to you if, for example, on licensing, we want to implement not the entire amount, but figure out how to generate $500,000, $500,000 increase on licensing. Then we can offset that and start balancing, changing numbers as far as the property increase.
Councilmember Anderson.
So just for a point of clarification, with no increase, we can do the budget, but we don't get the officers, we don't get the additional firefighters, we don't get the software. We use the old software that's not being supported anymore. None of the green sheets are funded without some sort of a property tax increase, like you've mentioned.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Let me just interject here too, because we've had this conversation. I brought my personal home tax bill in and had Bill Piper run what my tax increase would be if it was a 30% tax increase. In my particular case, it was $11 a month for my home. A $250,000 home that he did was $6.30 or something like that a month. And what the average home in Salt Lake County that he had was a $240,000 home or something like that, was still at about $6.20, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that was at a 30% increase, a tax increase. And what I would like to see the council even consider is what has been mentioned, not only a tax increase for this particular year, but an ongoing cost of living tax increase, at least for maybe 10 years, that maybe only 2 or 3% a year. We'd have to have a truth in taxation hearing. But if we'd have done something like this 25 years ago and just had a cost of living increase, the impact on households throughout the city is a lot less than, and a lot easier, I think, for folks to assimilate than it is and even for me at $11 a month, it's not an issue. For a lot of folks, it may be. The $6 a month may be an issue for them. But I think that's a very, very small portion of our city that would be complaining about a $6 increase. When you look at how many people even come to vote, when you get 114,000 people in our city and 40,000 registered voters and not even half of those vote, they don't care too much, it seems like. You start messing with their pocketbook, though, and they do care. But I think I look at anywhere from a $6 to a $10 a month increase in taxes is like, a couple of hamburgers and a couple of Cokes a couple times a month. Anyway, so I would be interested to see if in the next week, if council members want to address some of these issues like that, and provide for a truth and taxation hearing later in the year, so that we can resolve these issues, because there are, especially in the public safety, when we're trying to get 9 new fire officers and 5 new police officers, plus the other things that need to be completed that are needed to be done. In the green sheets, you'll even notice an expansion of the cemetery. Brian could probably tell you we'll run out of space in there and within the next 5 to 7, I think maybe 10 years, unless we enlarge that cemetery. So there's things that are needed to be done. Some things maybe could be put off another year or two, but I think we need to really consider very strongly some of these things. And so I think with my little speech, I'm going to go back to the list here, and Councilmember Anderson, you're first on there.
I just want to wrap up with the last comment. So the recommendation that you provided us was 10%, 20%, 30%. 20% would be 2.4 million. The green sheets are 3 million. So is there something in that $600,000 that we could do without? At that 600,000 between 20% and 25% that we could do without?
How much time can I buy? Yes, if the council decides 25% is appropriate, we'll figure that out. I'm trying to think of what item 600,000. Anyone want to volunteer any information at this point? I want to analyze that, how it impacts each department. I don't want to say right now, because it was hard. It was not easy to go from 8 million even down to 3.
Councilmember Whitelock.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions that I don't know the answer to. So on page 9, it shows different tax areas, and they're listed as 037, 24A, 24N. What do those mean?
And I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question, and you see something different?
Page 9.
Bill Piper can answer that
Tax
question.
areas. I'm wondering what those tax areas, what are they?
I can answer that. On page 11, it's got a description of those different tax areas. As you know, part of West Jordan, some of the students go to, are in the Jordan School District, and others are in the Granite School District. And so, like for instance, tax area 37, those, you're in the Jordan School District, and then tax area 24A, there's a little bit different allocation there. They're in the Taylorsville-Benyon Improvement District and the Granite School District, and then also in tax area 24N, they're in the Granite School District. So it just depends what area of the city you're in.
Okay, thank you. And then I heard different numbers on, so I would need accurate data to base my decision on as far as average home, $255,000. What is it really a month? Is it really $441? Is it $6? What is it really going to be? What is the impact really going to be? I need accurate, not maybe this is what it'll look like.
We'll work on getting that information in advance of the 13th. Do we go with the mean average or the high end? What's helpful to you? Do you want a low to a high? I mean, we certainly have $400,000 homes, but the average household is what I'm trying to probably target. What is it? How is it going to impact the general average citizen? So if I can get two numbers, I'll try to do the average number and then the extreme.
That would be helpful.
All right.
Thank you. And at 30%, how much money does that bring you?
At 255,000, if that's the average of homes, we calculated 3.6 million.
3.6. Okay.
And so 10% reflected 1.2 million, 20% double it, 30%,
Okay.
3 times
All of
that.
it just doubled. Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember McConaughey.
Thank you, Mayor. No questions per se, just some comments. For the last 2 hours or so, we've been doing kind of question and answer, and I haven't really had any questions that haven't already been answered, so I've been relatively quiet until the question that you brought up about the property tax increase. I think this kind of bookends well for me with where we started the meeting, talking about process. I feel like the approach that was taken for this budget process was kind of a divide and conquer. The council has been divided into small groups of 3, and I feel like we've been conquered by the budget. In years past, I've been on the council. This is my 7th year on the council now. And all the prior years, we've had opportunity to sit down and look at the individual numbers for some of the different, for each of the different departments and say, this is what we think that number should be, this number should be something else. We had a little bit of conversation here tonight. Well, there are a little bit of thoughts that were shared about solid waste policy, but as a council, we haven't addressed any of those. We haven't really set any policy. We haven't discussed what we think those numbers should be. Because we were split up, we talked a little bit about the value of doing a survey and maybe getting some of the insight from some of the intelligent people in the community to hear what they think. We also have some of those intelligent minds here on this council, and we're not all engaged. I miss the prior years when we were able to all weigh in on the different issues. We would have a number of budget committee work or budget workshops where we would talk about them and kind of throw our ideas out there. Sometimes it was messy, some of them were rather long, but I feel like with a total budget that's over $100 million, it seems appropriate. We're less than a week away from when we have to have a decision, and we haven't really had any of those conversations yet. So I'm not saying we don't have needs for additional funding. Certainly there's more that could be done, but we do have a need to understand where those funds will be going and also review what funds are currently being expended before we say, yes, let's bring in something additional. I'd like to go back and see some of the things that I'm not so sure we should be doing or not. But because we haven't had that conversation, I can't support any increase this year and absolutely won't say, yes, let's plan on it in perpetuity until I feel like we've all had a chance to share our thoughts, review the different items that are out there, and really work as a council. I know that sometimes with the state, that budget's so large they split up into groups and are very reliant on those subcommittees to provide insight, but I feel like none of those insights were shared. I don't feel like we've had the same information. I don't feel like we're on the same page. So that's where I come down right now. I'm not a fan of how the process played out this year. I miss how we did it in prior years. And primarily because of the process, I couldn't be supportive of any increase. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Jacob.
Thank you, Mayor. I've had a lot of similar thoughts on the process. Not that I didn't like the idea of splitting this up into groups and having these smaller, more focused conversations. I thought the idea was sound. The execution, I thought, maybe was lacking a little bit. I thought this meeting was a workshop meeting where we were all going to open mic night and ask your questions and let's debate all the individual numbers. 2 hours into it, we haven't done that yet. So I'm not sure what this meeting is in comparison to years past. This meeting, I would like to see become that. However, it's already 8 o'clock. So, so you have 2 hours.
Our meetings typically last till 10.
Yeah. So just that's my thought on the process. I thought this was going to be the meeting where we come together and let's all share and talk about it. Maybe we'll do that next week too. After the public hearing, before we adopt or vote on truth and taxation or whatever it's going to be. And then just as a tax policy kind of, my thought on tax policy is if we are going to approve green sheets, my thought is you approve the one-time funds out of one-time funds. We have a plenty big surplus in our general fund. It's always exceeding or bumping up against that 25% limit. If we need to spend $2 million out of the general fund reserves on one-time funds, then we can do that for the one-time funds. The only thing I'd ever consider a tax increase for would be the ongoing expenses. That's where you need ongoing money. You don't need ongoing money. You don't need $3 million in taxes every year to pay for $2 million worth of things that are one-time expenditures. So if we're going to look at a tax increase, and I would probably support a truth and taxation hearing, if for nothing else, it gives us 2 more months to look at the budget. So I would probably support voting for the truth and taxation hearing so that we can hash this out a little longer and decide if it's really needed. But as a policy point of view, my opinion is you use one-time funds for one-time expenditures, you use ongoing funds for ongoing expenditures. You don't need to raise taxes this year that's going to keep taxes up forever and ever just to pay for $55,000 in new software. You can spend that money out of a reserve fund one time and you don't need to pay for that every year. So it's just it's that never-ending tax that Councilmember Anderson mentioned earlier.
Councilmember Anderson.
I don't know if it was me that mentioned, I think it was Councilmember Lamb, but
Oh,
I think, but.
I ate you 2 weeks ago.
We sound the same.
David, thank you, Mayor, for allowing me to speak. So what I want to do, number one, is I do public budgets for a living. I look at numbers 8 hours every day. So here's what I'm saying. I appreciated the sub-meetings, and I think we need to be going through the numbers. That's kind of maybe what we should have done with this meeting, going through specific ones. The last 2 years that I've been on the council, we have balanced the budget by selling surplus property, real property, and using reserves, things that we haven't spent, correct? So money that we haven't spent. We've done that for 2 years in a row now, which to me is not sustainable. I don't do that with my household expenses. We shouldn't do that with what we do at the city. As you and I have talked just individually, we've talked about my concern about processes and systems of success in the city of West Jordan with how we in the past, and this is not looking at current department heads, this is not looking at current administration or even the current council, the city collectively, to me, is very reactionary. There's a fire, we got to put it out. There's a fire over here, we got to put it out. There's a fire there, we've got to put it out. We need to come up with a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan of where we're headed, where we're going. So I'm going to put Kent on the spot, if he'll come up. For me, economic development is job one. So, Kent, I know you're new. I know I'm putting you on the spot. But what I would like to see, and we are on an 8 ball. The reality is, without a truth and taxation hearing, we have to approve the budget by state law next week. But I want to have Kent just kind of explain. For me, economic development is job one. There's 3 areas that I have an interest in with District 4 and as a member of the City Council. That is the property across the street with the Jordan School District. The second one is the east side of Airport number 2. And the third one is the former Facebook property, the former Discus property. There'll be other things that happen, but for me, as a background in business with my Chamber of Commerce experience, so I want to just see, you've had a increase in the budget, but I want to see if there's some things that we can do to help with vacated buildings that are vacant. And I know those are hard because we have a number of them where the previous tenant is paying full lease to the landowner and the landowner has no incentive to replace that. But maybe you can address just some of the things that you're working on in economic development to kind of support what we're trying to do as we get this vision. This isn't going to change overnight.
I think that last point was probably the point that I was going to make, is that economic development it's a long prospect depending on the project that you're working on. You mentioned 3 items that I'm currently working on, all 3 of those items. We recently received a grant from the Wasatch Front Regional Council to do a study for the city center that would allow us to potentially have that area designated as a UTA, transit-oriented development, which would allow them to participate with their land in a joint venture. Part of that process is also going to analyze the estimated cost to that increment that would be generated through the redevelopment agency, cost that it would take to either keep the school district at that location, et cetera, look at alternatives. The airport number 2, I've met with the Economic Development Corporation of Utah and the Governor's Office of Economic Development, both mentioning interest in looking for options for that. And then you mentioned Project Discus on the property right next door. We're working on a current project called Project Lone Star that's getting further and further along that we're feeling very strong about. But all of these projects are not going to deal or satisfy any budget concerns for fiscal year 18-19. These are all items that are going to continue to take some time to come to fruition and start having that return. In the meantime, we're really looking at capturing what I have recently found out is what we call leakage in the retail sector. We've got 1.4 billion approximately of potential sales that could occur in West Jordan. We're currently capturing approximately half of that. So half of the potential sales that could occur in West Jordan are leaving the city. That's probably one of the most immediate focuses. Any conversations you have with any residents, et cetera, that's one way to help address budgetary issues, is to make sure that people are shopping local and keeping their sales within the city.
Okay, thank you, Kent. And David, I know we're getting there, and this isn't going to be, you know, of all people, I know that this is not going to be, hey, we've fixed everything, it's great, it's 2019, everything's here. But I think as we go through this process, maybe you can express your vision of where we're headed, so that in 2025 or 2026, we as a council and whoever is up here after the change in form of government and the department heads that we've got in place, look at, you know, yeah, to get to where we want to be in 2025, we need a 17% tax increase this year and a 3% next year and 0 the next year. It's just like when I first got on the council and wanted to have a 5-year water rate plan for the benefit of residents. Even if it increases every year, that's what we're being charged as purchasers of water. But to have a 5-year plan so people have some predictability. We need to be competitive with police. Is that on our 5-year plan, so that 2025, the 50 officers that Salt Lake City's trying to hire, the 32 officers that Harriman's trying to hire, say, you know what, I'm staying at West Jordan because this is where I'm family, this is where this is where that is. So we know what our destination is in 2025 or 2030, and I think that helps the process of making these decisions. How much does business license fees apply to these, as Councilman Jacobs said, one-time funds that might be able to come out of revisiting? I also noticed that on our fee schedule, there's a number of fees on our online fee schedule where the last update was, it says pre-2006, which is 12 years ago. And again, this is how we used to be. This is how West Jordan used to be. That's what I want to clarify that. We need to go to a different place. And I'm willing to support an increase as long as we have a vision. We know what we're doing, which is public safety and fire and economic development. We're lightening dark buildings, and that by 2025, our 50% leakage is only 20% leakage. And we have a hotel, or we have, you know, dark stores are now filled. We have business license fees. We have a 5-year plan on water rates. We have a 5-year plan on tax. We have a 5-year plan on where we're taking the police and parks. And that's eating a whole elephant. And this year we might be able to only eat one leg. And next year's another leg. But we won't know what we're doing until we know where we're headed.
That's a fair request, a reasonable one, one I'm excited that we can tackle. We have the skill set surrounding you to make that happen. We can actually get there. I think it's some great ideas of how to make that presentation to you. We'll work on that.
Every one of these people here have the knowledge, the background, and the experience to come up with where we're headed. And I think the residents want to know where we're headed. And for so long, we're doing this because so-and-so did it, or this is how it's always been done. And we just have to change the mindset. This is monumental, but we have to know where we're going. And that's all I have. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Burton.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for Kent, if I may. During your comments, you raised a couple of questions in my mind. So there's been discussion about property tax increase, different percentages, and you also mentioned the leakage we have of people going to other cities to do their purchasing. If we do a property tax increase, how will that affect the leakage?
That's a challenging question to ask because there's a lot of dynamics that you could put onto that. You could add that, you know, a retailer would be less likely to build a location in the city due to property tax rates. I think right now the way our property tax rates, we're about median in the county, so I don't think it would affect that too much one way or the other. You know, honestly, I think really it would affect more of the commercial aspect of it, and my anticipation that it would not have too strong of an effect on the leakage.
Okay, so you mentioned businesses coming here. I'm thinking leakage, I'm thinking of people in West Jordan going outside of West Jordan to do their purchases.
So when I'm thinking of leakage, it's not only people leaving to make purchases, but the options are not existing currently for them to make their purchases at. And so there's certain categories through a leakage analysis that'll identify that that's where that leakage is occurring. So internally, we're now looking at specifically identifying those categories, because that's obviously something that we don't either provide that specific facility or enough breadth of that type of retailer to satisfy the needs of our residents.
And if our property tax is lower than our adjoining cities, how would that affect the leakage?
Pardon, what was the question?
If our property tax is lower than the adjoining cities around us, how would that affect the leakage in West Jordan?
Again, I think it would be very minor.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Whitelock.
Well, so I've heard my fellow councilmen express a desire to delve into this. I'm looking at the clock, it's only 8:15. And I also heard the city manager say, can you give me some idea of what might happen when we meet to vote on the budget? So I would kind of like to maybe accomplish both of those. I really liked Councilmember Jacobs' idea of maybe, you know, if there are 4 or more of us that are willing to say, we need more time, so we're going to look at a truth in taxation, which gives us more time on our budget to delve into it deeper together. But I just kind of feel like if we leave tonight with what we've done, we really are in a sorry spot for the 13th, in my opinion. So I would just like to see if we could either have some of that discussion tonight, or at least give an indication if we're willing to say we're going to do a truth in taxation to explore it further.
Councilmember Anderson.
Sorry to jump in again. I would be hesitant myself to call for a truth in taxation to delay the process and the cost that's associated with that. The communications that we're sending out only to buy us time to discuss the budget, I think that has higher ramifications than maybe what we're intending. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But with just a little insight, with your permission, Mayor, when I present my public budget to a board, we go down numbers like Councilmember McConaughey had suggested. And so I don't know if we have on the screen the proposed budget, not the page 2 with the changes, but the tentative budget that was presented that we could put up on the screen and just have some dialogue on some of those numbers. I don't know why we need to wait till next week. I don't know what everybody else's thoughts are, but I'm okay going through some numbers and looking at where we're at with revenue projections and whatever my fellow colleagues would like to do.
Councilmember Jacob.
Thank you, Mayor. I do think that we should do that, what Mr. Anderson just said. Mr. Anderson. However, I think we need to turn all the mics on. This formal, we always do this meeting. We've done this meeting every year, and we always do it around a table where everybody just talks. And it's a work meeting. So far, this is not a work meeting. This is a formal city council type meeting. We got our Roberts rules going on and whatever. I would suggest turning everybody's mics on so that we can have a conversation. this is not working with the having to wait till somebody's done to pipe in and stuff like that. When you wanted to make a point on something you said 10 minutes ago, this doesn't work for that discussion unless we can get all the mics turned on. I don't know. Oh, Michael's back there. He could do it. There's probably just a switch to flip.
Anybody have a problem with doing that and moving ahead with just open mic discussions? Doesn't look like there is, so Jamie, can you do that?
Without pushing a button?
Anybody else, everybody else on? Are you on?
Let's see. Nope. Not yet.
There, I'm not.
Well, now that we have the tentative budget up and it's been up, we've had it for how long, a month or two? How long we had this? When was it approved? A month ago? So everybody's had a chance probably to look at things that they're concerned with, so let's just jump in and start asking your questions about what you feel you want to talk about then.
Do all the mics work? We can all turn on.
Look, we're on at the same time.
Look at that. Okay, so, and Eric, maybe, I don't know, David, your staff.
I think it would be better to address to Eric specifically, and then I'll try to chime in as well, but.
Okay, so, Eric,
Really quick, there's a request on the Facebook Live to zoom in. Can we zoom
on the computer
in
screen?
on the screen? Just because they're having a hard time reading anything that's on there, just probably one more.
That's a question for Michael Oliver. Michael,
No,
can you?
that's perfect. Just one more of those that you just did.
But that won't fit on our screen.
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
there we go.
perfect.
Okay, Eric, Mayor, with your permission, I'll just kind of lead it off and
Move
others
ahead.
can jump in. So taxes are including property and sales tax. Is there any others that we're missing in that line item?
There's some others, but I gotta get to that. Well, okay, that'll just take me a second.
Mayor, if I might.
The open mic, so jump in when.
While we've got while that's coming up, a question for Mr. Brick here, perhaps Mr. Wall. As this is the first real streaming of a council meeting, I know previously Mr. Church had cautioned us against being on social media during council meetings. His concern was that it might give some members of the public additional opportunity to chime in when those who are here in the meeting in person aren't able to. For example, after the public comment period's closed, somebody could chime in or send text messages or emails or Facebook comments to folks on the city council. Is there anything in our policy that covers the use of social media by council during a streaming event?
I think I did read something to that effect in our rules, policies, and procedures, that we should not be on social media while we're on the dais. So, but we probably need to just verify
Yeah,
that.
Mayor, if you give me 5 minutes, I can find it, but this last, it was 3, I'm not gonna commit it. It's a couple of legislative sessions ago, the legislature passed a law, a bill, and it's now in statute, that when a legislative body is in session, those are the operative words, that it is inappropriate, it's against the open meetings law to be communicating using social media. Interestingly enough, it applies differently to the U7 than it does the legislature, because the legislature is in session for 45 days. You're in session for 2 or 3 hours a night. So during this meeting, yes, it's inappropriate to be using social media to communicate per state statute. I'd have to look at the city policy, but there is a state statute that now covers it.
Yeah, as our policy went out, I didn't remember seeing anything on that, and just want to be careful because I don't want folks to be able to make a comment on social media, but the folks who are here in person are prohibited from speaking. So that's where that came from, as we were stalling for time. Thank you.
Thank you. So these are all the line items that generate that tax line item. And I know you and I had talked about the utility, I think it was either the cable or utility franchise tax, as people disconnect from cable and telephones, is the 650,000 for FY 18-19 for cable franchise tax 314000, when our year-end estimate is 777. There's about a $23,000, $22,300 difference between our year-end estimate and the proposed. These are little dollars, and there's other ones in there, but I just want to make sure that we're projecting accurate numbers on revenue. So do you feel comfortable that even though people are disconnecting services like cable, that we'll still see an increase due to growth or business, or?
Well, as, again, it being a projection, I think it's in a reasonably tight ballpark. I mean, when you say, is it accurate, it won't be exactly that, but
right.
We'll hope that it's reasonably close.
And there was about a $40,000 decrease projected for FY 18-19 in the utility franchise tax, which I'm assuming is similar. So I'm just, as you and I had chatted, just wondering, as we see different trends in that, we see an increase in cable but a decrease in utility franchise, and utility covers phone, electricity, natural gas. So we'll have some increase in that. Is that?
It's primarily electricity and natural gas. The phone comes in the telecommunications line right below it. Now, this is an interesting one because it's really difficult to do any kind of trend analysis on this because it's significantly impacted by the weather patterns. Okay, if we have a warmer than usual winter, we're going to use less natural gas, so that'll drop our revenues, below the average. If we have a really hot summer, people are going to use a lot of electricity for their air conditioners, and we might have a higher bump than the average there. So there is a significant environmental element to that line.
And utility franchise tax, that's also dependent upon rate increases and decreases from the utilities because it's based on the price, right? So Dominion Energy, who just had, I think, a $92 million rate decrease, that would be reflected under the utility franchise tax because if their rate decreased, we would receive less utility franchise tax.
In general, yes.
Okay. I don't want to take over. I mean, you guys feel free to jump in. These are all small potatoes on dollar amounts.
Dirk wanted to talk too, and he disappeared.
Okay, so property tax looks like it's pretty similar. It's only about a $13,000 difference, but that's without the certified tax rate and probably not taking into account property tax growth over the past 12 months. This is pretty close to what. This is much more accurate than it was last year, by the way, as far as being closer to what it was rather than being overstated. And I don't know if you had any insight, Bill, to some of this or more Eric, but and then can we, I don't know if anybody, we can go back to revenue, but can we scroll down just a little bit to licenses and permits? Revenue. Which is, sorry. Thank you, Councilmember Jacob. So I wish I could talk about bigger numbers, but business licenses has concerned me for the past year because I think we are, I think we're missing the mark on this. And now we have a year-end estimate of almost 300,000, but because the legislature has changed how we, about home-based businesses paying business license fees, we now see a decrease of almost $100,000 in business licenses. So I'm grateful that we had the foresight to have a study done to see what it actually costs us for business licenses. Looks like animal licenses stays the same. There's not much growth in licenses and permits, which is why I think we have Kent, is to help us with licenses and permits, and also Scott and others in development services. But you can see, I don't have the heading here, but I think if I'm reading this right, the 3.381 at the total licenses and permits, that second column, that is this year's budget. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then the 3.4 million is our estimated year end. So we're up about 100,000, but we're down 400,000 on the projected budget on licenses and permits. Do you know what that difference is? The 400,000?
Well, the biggest part is the slowing down of the building permits. You know, I mean, we've had some pretty dramatic building activity, and we're essentially saying we don't think it will continue at quite that level.
And is there a reason it's not continuing at that level? I mean, is it just, are we not attracting them? Are we?
I don't know about specifics.
Scott's got a comment. I look at this licenses and permits, and there's 400,000 difference. Our budget is less than what our budget was this year, and even bigger than what our year-end estimate is. So I'm just trying to see where 400,000 is.
So regarding the building permit, the total that you see, the 2.5 million. The reason why we had a record year, or one of the reasons why we had such a good year, is we did a number of multifamily developments. Those bring in quite a bit of money, and because of the cap and grade, we don't expect to see that year after year. Now we still have a little over 2,000 multifamily units still in the pipeline that are grandfathered in, and they're going to continue to come. But the way things line up, when people pull their permits and so forth, we may not be able to sustain that. The single-family homes, they keep flying through the door. And we don't expect to see that slow down. But it's the multifamily, it's the big projects that are the bigger ticket items. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Yeah, it does. Thank you. Yeah, you can. It's open mic, so you can jump in.
Don't want to interrupt.
I want us to have a good discussion, all of us, on these numbers.
So for the police chief, one of the things I'm looking at is the request for the additional officers. I'm looking at salary where we're at now, and this is a similar question of fire, but more for police right now. How many open positions do we have for police officers currently?
Right now, open-wise, where we haven't identified or hired somebody, we're at 6. We were at 4 a couple weeks ago, but we're going to lose one to retirement, and we just lost one that was going to come here. We lost her to Salt Lake, or UPD.
Have we been at full staffing over the last year at any point?
No, we have not.
So historically, this has been one of those philosophical things that was kind of difficult for me to grasp when I first started on the council, but the thought was always, if you're planning on hiring certain people, you should be able to pay for those people and assume every single position is going to be full. But given the amount of staff that we have, near 500 positions, there's always some sort of turnover. So as I'm looking at the budget, the adjusted budget for police for salaries and benefits last year was basically 15.6 million. The year-end estimate is roughly 14.9, so we've got about a $1.6 million difference between what budget was approved and what we think we're actually going to spend. The proposed budget, the tentative budget that was approved, looks like that bumps it up to 16.2. So I guess on this one, my question is, with the additional officers that have been requested in the green sheets, what's the likelihood that all of those could be staffed in the next 12 months, or what would be a reasonable time frame to see that scaled in. And then I'm gonna have that same question for fire, if it's reasonable to think that we could instantly add 9 additional folks.
Part of the problem for us is that the police academies filling up with different agencies. There's one police academy that's offered to all the agencies in the state, and the state runs it. So when there's a lot of troopers that need to be hired, the state tries to fill it up with their own folks, and then we're competing with a bunch of different agencies trying to get that in. We do have plans to try to address that. It's not that, for example, we're looking at hiring people now. We have 2 people we're looking to hire now, but we can't get them into the police academy until August because it's full. But we're looking at ways to address that. We're looking at ways to maybe use other like colleges and stuff to send our officers through or our recruits through. We're also looking at talking with Salt Lake Community College and trying to set up some type of day academy, because they do run a different academy, but it takes 8 or 9 months to get through, versus the police academy is 14 weeks. So we're hoping to work with and partner with Salt Lake Community College, talk with them to see if we can't set up some type of training academy with them that's a 14-week deal instead of an 8 or 9 month deal. So we're working on plans to try to address that, to get those folks hired within the next year.
Okay, thank you. My thought process here is more along the lines of, if we're not fairly confident we're going to be able to staff all the positions, I'd rather see those funds used where they can be expended rather than just end up sitting on the paper and end up, oh yeah, we had 15.5 budgeted, but then we ended up turning some back. I'd like to see us make sure whatever changes are, I'm going to stop myself there because I don't think it's coming across right. I'm not opposed to increasing the staffing. It's something that we've consistently done. I just want to make sure that it's achievable and that we're not allocating money to one department that isn't going to be used when there are others that have a deficit as well. So similar question for the fire department. How many openings do we currently have? Have we been at full staffing over the course of the year? And then what's the likelihood that if those 9 positions were approved, that we'd be able to fill those within the next 12 months?
We would fill them 9. We want to fill them immediately. We've already talked with HR pending the approval of our 9. We want to advertise. If this is approved the 13th, we're ready to go out for advertising.
Are we at full staffing right now?
No, we're down. We lost 6 people, which was an anomaly this year. I mean, all within 3 months. So currently we have 4 people in recruit school. We did have 5, we lost 1. And then the change of government or the organizational chart that I want to implement it's pending. So some things are moving around. So we are going to save some money, but we took a big hit on the retirement portion. Those retirees, those people that retired. So we're making that up, but we're not spending it as much now too, because everyone's at a lower rate. You know, the people that are acting in those rates. But to answer the question about the 9, yeah, we anticipate, you know, there's a process. You have to post it. You got to give the 2-week notice, background check, all that, physical, and probably get them on board the first part of August and go to an 8-week recruit camp and then go. And I mean, it's hard to keep track. I mean, we're getting to be an aging department, an older department. I know 2 people that are going to retire later this year. So it's hard to, you know, if someone gets injured, it's hard to anticipate a lot of that. But we want to comprise a list of 80 firefighters that we could draw from. And we're going to do our own tests this year. In the past years, we've been doing a metro test, which is all the metro agencies combined. We didn't see a lot of positive things with that.
Yeah, and with fire department salaries and budgets, this year they were, the adjusted budget shows 9.5 million, and we're estimated year end to hit 9.5 million. So it seems like it's easier to recruit and retain folks in fire than it is for police. So beautiful. That answers that question for me. I'll let anybody else jump in.
Great. This is probably for you, Mr. Bricky. I see all over in the place we have a sick leave buyout. Can you explain to me what a sick leave buyout is?
What page are you referring to?
Well, I just picked one page here. Let's say page 93 under benefits. I see a sick leave buyout of $500. It hasn't been there on other times. And then if I just go to another page, here's another one, page 40. I see a sick leave buyout of $1,200.
Any of the details for any of the departments in the salary section?
It's all over in there. And I'm just wondering what that is.
I can tell you.
Okay.
It's for people who do not use their sick leave, they can sell it back. And it's not entirely their entire sick leave. It's like if they didn't use 50% in the year, they can sell that 50% back.
Was that not been available ever before? Because it's not budgeted anywhere. This is the first
Mark
time
took
it's
it
shown
out,
up.
I think, for a couple of years. It's been available up until Mark came along, and then Mark took it out. And David has put it back.
Yeah.
That buyback was an item that Mr. Palish removed 2 years ago. The amount is, I thought it was $120,000. And in fact, in my estimation, it was a small amount to gain back a lot of loyalty with your employees who felt like, one, it was taken away from them after it was already placed in the budget the year before, and it's often used by those employees who take good care of themselves, are healthy, and they use it at a time when at the end of the year they can apply it towards Christmas gifts or holiday gifts. So
we're not making them lie to get their money.
No.
They can be honest.
What and from an employee standpoint, if people could not sell it back, they would be sick.
Right, that's what I meant.
And
They're being honest.
yeah, and so I think it's good to have them there and to be able to. It's a benefit for them to be, because it came out around the 1st of December is when they would issue that check, and everybody used it for Christmas.
And when I met with the Employees Association for the last several months, I've asked them to prioritize what it is that they thought was important from the council that I could share with the council. That routinely is number one.
Thank you. The other question I have is also showing up on several pages. We have an interfund chargeback. What is that?
I'm really having a hard time understanding everyone tonight, and I'm not sure. I'm going to get a new hearing aid. I'm working on that. What was that?
Don't see a line item for the hearing aid.
Let Eric answer, or Eric, you can answer that one.
You field this one, if you would, please.
Okay, this takes a little bit of explanation. The reason you're seeing a negative number there is we've changed our process of dealing with an item that has been ongoing. I mean, we've always had it, but we're required by the state auditor, and by our independent auditors to, the purpose of these is for the enterprise funds, for example, to pay the general fund back for services rendered for those enterprise funds. A prime example would be our utility billing operation that's housed in the finance department, but yet is solely related to the water, sewer, storm, solid waste billing. Okay, so those funds, those other enterprise funds, pay the general fund back. But because we have to go at the end of the year at an audit, and we say we can't show those numbers in the finance department, we back them out. And instead of money moving back and forth between the funds, we just show it, we take it out of the general fund and we show it as being spent in the enterprise funds. Okay, so this is an accounting, mechanics operation to more accurately reflect that process. And in the past, we haven't budgeted this way, but now we are.
So it's similar to the finance department billing the enterprise funds for the services they're doing for them. but you're just giving them a credit into there, you're not
Correct,
actually changing
right. Instead of billing them and then sending us money, we just send the expenses over to them.
Thank you.
So it's, most of us recognize that the enterprise funds are like a business. It's like a private water company or a private sewer company, a private solid waste company, and so forth. And so, yeah, it's just is a way of using that portion of time, paying for that portion of time that those utility funds are using from the finance department. Because the state law says that we, even though our city is operating those enterprise funds, we still have to treat them financially on the books as if they're separate entities.
Thank you.
Okay.
So this is, if I remember, this is the city manager. Can we go to something that's a little more impactful? Can we hit like Public Works or police or fire? See if I've got a page number. I agree with Councilmember McConaughey that, you know, if we desire 20 new police officers, but the reality is we can only fill 9 or 10, that we probably ought to only budget 9 or 10. And
if I might interject in that, I almost agree. I want them to not limit how many they're going to get because we lowered that budget, just because we realized that. I'd like them still to try for that higher number. And if we end up expending those funds, if we're fortunate to get those officers sooner, then we could do a budget amendment during the middle of the year. I don't want them to think, oh, we're getting close to that lower number, we better stop. I want them to keep going for the higher number, and then we reallocate the funds.
Well, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. What we should be doing as a council is looking more holistically. So if we were on the bridge of a passenger vessel, we would be up there, but we would know where we're going. We would know how much fuel we need, how much food we need, how many employees we need to get to our destination. And I think as we look at this budget, that is how we have to look. This is what I do at the school. At the school, it's a little different because as Councilman Whitelock knows from her time on the Jordan School Board, the state gives you a set amount of money. It doesn't change it. I know right now how much money the state's going to provide our school for next fiscal year. I don't have to worry about property taxes and sales tax numbers and fees and forfeitures and all those kind of things. I have a set amount. But likewise, if we were planning something, if we were planning to go somewhere in 2025 or 2030, we would know what we would need right now to get to that destination. If it's developing the east side of the airport, if it's developing the what do we call it, Pioneer Tech Center Park, and whatever we want to do across the street, if those are our priorities, what do we need to do in fiscal year 19 to lay the groundwork to get to that point in 2025? Kind of like my analogy with the boat. So I don't necessarily disagree with that, although we do have finite resources. We don't have money growing on trees. We've got to be mindful of our residents who pay the taxes. My tax bill for West Jordan City is $1 a day currently. $361, I think, is what my current property tax bill, just for West Jordan. That doesn't include the school district. It doesn't include Salt Lake County. It doesn't include library. Doesn't include the mosquito abatement group. So, you know, just you look at something right here with the police department, and Chief Davis, please know I'm not. My family has a 35-year history with public service and police. So we're going in this budget, and this is not taking into account the green sheets, right, David?
Correct.
So everything's status quo. Employees need raises. Employees' health insurance goes up. We're going from $14.9 million to $16.2 million, which is about $1.3 million, keeping things status quo in the police department. Now, other extenuating circumstances that occur in the police department, and this could be said with pretty much any department, whether it be public works, fire, development services, economic development. There's other entities, as Councilmember Whitelock mentioned, or maybe it was the mayor, there's other cities that want to hire police officers. Now, in reality, Harriman City changing from UPD to their own department, it wouldn't surprise me if the majority, if not all of the 32 officers they would use would come from UPD. Salt Lake is not the same equation. Salt Lake wants to increase 50 police officers. They're not converting from one form to another form. So just to keep things status quo, we're seeing a $1.3 million increase in the police department for salaries and benefits. Are we competitive? Do we lose officers to other entities because our benefits aren't as good as others?
Is that a question for the police?
Yeah.
Okay, I know I'm guilty of rambling on, council member, but I would like to keep things moving with questions that they can answer.
Okay.
Because, and we all do this, we all like to make some statements, and sometimes they can go on longer than.
Yeah, that's a question for the chief, is if our benefits are
can
competitive.
Think about some good questions that they can answer, because I know we, and I'm trying not to do that now, but let's see if we can get some questions and get them answered.
So yes, we have lost people because they think that they are receiving better benefits from other agencies, Cottonwood Heights. We've also lost some to outside the state as well. So yes, we do lose people to that, and that is a concern of ours, is trying to retain the folks that we have.
And does that impact recruiting?
Yes, it does impact recruiting. It used to be that we had a pool of people we would choose from 10, 15 years ago. It was a big pool of people. It was no big deal. That pool now has become a puddle. And so it's a puddle for everybody. It's a puddle for every agency. So what all the agencies are trying to do is they're trying to steal from everybody else. And so they're offering incentives, they're offering other ideas or ways to attract police officers to come to their agency. Because if you can pick up a police officer that's already trained, has years of experience, you don't have to invest as much time or money in them. So that is a concern of ours, is when the incentives and the pay and the compensation picks up in other agencies, we're going to lose those folks.
Okay, thank you. And then Mayor, if I may, tying in those comments to Judge Kuhn's comments last council meeting about the shift in crime that's occurring in West Jordan, from the minor traffic stuff to the domestic violence and some of the other more serious crime. So it came across to me that there's a desire to increase our police department staffing so that we can address some of these changes in dynamics within the community. So I think this is where it ties in for us as a council, where we have a $1.3 million increase in police with 113 officers, 115 officers?
We have, we're allotted 117.
117 officers. To keep status quo, there's a shift that's occurring within our community. So now, do we as a council give funding, authorized funding for the city manager and the police department to address these shifting dynamics? I guess, so that's more of a statement than a question that I know you're desiring. So I think these are the things that us as a council need to be discussing. Is status quo for police is 1.3 million increase. We've had data come to us on the bridge of this ship that the waters are choppier than what we had envisioned. It's more fuel, we've got a couple other navigators maybe. Does that make sense?
I think it's important to remember also, in the spirit of an open conversation, that this budget right here with this $1.3 million increase is balanced currently. This one's already accounted for. It's the others.
Correct.
And that's kind of the point I was trying to get to earlier. I don't think it came across accurately. When we're looking at the additional staffing that's needed. We don't necessarily have to say, well, this puts Eric in a terrible position. Because historically, we've always said, okay, well, let's put it in there, budget as if we've got the person for the full year. Well, that's a number that we know we're obviously not gonna hit. If the number's not approved till July 1st, we don't go out, we post, it still takes 3 months to get somebody on. Well, you've a quarter of what you had set aside is never going to be expended. So we could prorate, and that's why in years past, I've been okay with budgets that aren't perfectly aligned, that are taking some from the fund balance, because we know that there's gonna be some element of savings, specifically from personnel, so I'm okay seeing that there. I don't have too many questions or concerns with the tentative budget that's already been adopted. I'm happy with that. It's really more the green sheets. So the big thing I would say, rather than carrying on too much longer, is highlight what Councilmember Jacob said earlier, where it'd be helpful to see that number broken out, the green sheet number broken out, so we can see what's one-time expenses and what would be on recurring expenses, so that we can easily say, well, yes, we had a surplus of this amount, we can pay these, and then these others, these would be the ongoing, and then we can separate those out.
Did you get this, Chris?
We sent that, and what I can tell you is,
'Cause it shows
it's
the
a little
one-time.
hard to notice. There's a one-time column, it's 1.694.
What I was looking at was this one right here, where it just says the adopted budget number, the 2.9 million.
So you didn't get this sheet, I guess? This is all the green sheets that.
This is,
No, it's
Yeah.
not.
And that's
But-
what I'm saying, if that that's where I wanna have the conversation on here and see what's.
You'd like that 2.9 broken out to see what was one time and what's not one time?
Yeah.
so this presupposes a tax increase, right? This paper that was handed out today, showing general fund revenues of 62.8 million. You guys handed it out. The one you handed out, no. The one you handed out with general fund revenue 62.848 million, does that presuppose the tax increase? Because it's got $3 million of green sheets in here and it balances. So I imagine that presupposes the tax increase is in there.
But that also has 8 million of reserves up in the revenue section.
Oh, gotcha.
That's correct. It supposes or presupposes that we include the proposed green sheets, but
We pay for them
it's
all out of
exactly as
reserves.
Councilmember McConaughey said, that
Good
it's
catch.
represented as using fund reserves
Yeah, rather than
in
adding that
that
number to
sheet, rather,
tax.
the taxes hasn't gone up yet on that.
And
I guess the question, Chris, would you like to have them our city manager revise this so that it shows, like in the next, tomorrow, he probably could revise that and send it out to you, to everybody, to all of us, so that you
I
could
think
see.
we want a page like this, showing the 2.9 million.
um,
Is that correct, Chris?
Well, something more like this, because it shows the,
No, I get that.
but I think what he's looking at, rather than just have one line of 2.9 million, you have a couple lines.
yes,
there.
yeah. And that I believe is what we've done in the past, where we've had one line for green sheets, one-time expenses, one line for green sheets, ongoing expenses.
Yeah.
So that we could better see, okay, what would that contribution from fund reserves actually be?
Okay.
So that's what I would be interested in. The other question is to whether or not I'd be willing to entertain the idea of supporting truth and taxation hearing to buy us additional time. At this point, no. I think if we say that we're going to do a truth and taxation hearing, and I mean, if the intent is to discuss the possibility or potential of raising taxes, then yes, we should do the truth and taxation hearing. If it's to buy us additional time to discuss the budget, I think that could send a really, really mixed message to the public. If we say we're doing a truth and taxation hearing, but we're not sure if we're gonna do it or not, if we're going to do a truth and taxation hearing with the purpose just to extend, I don't think that's right, so I wouldn't do that. If it were to say, well, here are the reasons we're looking for a property tax increase, and it's very clear to the citizens so that they could come to those hearings and state their opinions. I just worry that without having a clear reason, is it for timing purposes or is it for actually discussing a property tax increase? I worry that the opinions of citizens could get discounted if we're not sure the purpose of it ourselves. So where I'm not in favor of a property tax increase at this time, I wouldn't be in favor of the truth and taxation hearing route. That said, if there are still some things that don't get hammered out until a little bit further down the road, we can do a budget increase as long as it doesn't require additional revenues. There are things like the modifications to the fee schedule for the licenses. We don't necessarily have to have that done right now. We could do a later budget adjustment, or we could do the modification to the fee schedule, and then later down the road, usually towards the end of the year, we have a budget adjustment anyway. So that's an option as well, as long as it's not something that actually requires a tax increase. So.
Well, so everybody understands too that some of these one-time things are tied to multiple year expenses. A one-time vehicle cost for a new employee, certainly a one-time cost to get that vehicle here, but that new employee is going to cost, so from then on. So to just separate out the one-time costs from ongoing costs, it could be somewhat misleading because of that kind of a thing. You wouldn't want to, if you're not going to hire the employee, then you don't need that one-time cost as well.
And that was one of the things I learned first year on the council, working with the water department, looking at their budget, saying, well, you were approved for this much, but you only spent, you were approved for X, but you only spent Y. How is that? Well, we were approved for the equipment, but not for the personnel. So without the personnel, the equipment didn't make sense. But I think it gets us closer a little bit faster.
Yeah, what you're saying, Mayor, it makes sense when you're looking at the numbers in aggregate. If you're looking at the total and you say, well, I want to approve only half of this ongoing amount and all of this one-time amount, you're right, it doesn't make any sense. You got to look at them individually. If you're going to approve one that's the vehicle and the person, you got to make sure those are both in the total when you're done at the bottom. So I agree with what you're saying, but I think it's understood. And just to be clear, I don't necessarily want to call for truth and taxation just to have more time. My point is that when we do have a truth and taxation, because we are looking at tax increases that are on the table, it does provide more time so that we can look at what's being requested for that tax increase and see if it's something we really want to look at and evaluate and decide.
And that comment wasn't directed towards you. Alan and I had this conversation earlier today over the phone saying, well, what do we think?
But it does buy us more time.
It does.
So.
Today seems, for me, it's been a lot about process and how we get there. And again, it goes back to process and making sure, especially with a property tax increase, we did that for the first time. I think we did it in 1988, and then we did it again my first year on the council.
2012.
And that's one of the things I honestly really regret. I feel like all of us on the council were supportive of it at the time, but I feel like there was a lot of information I didn't know. I didn't realize what questions I should and shouldn't be asking. And politically, we bled, and it was very, very painful with the public. And it was advertised as, I want to say, a 19% property tax increase, and it only got us like $1.3 million in additional revenue. I wonder if we had put the same time and effort and emphasis on economic development, if we would have had better returns from that. I just had a bad experience that first time around, so I'm really hesitant with the property tax increase, and that's why, again, going back to the process this time, like even the solid waste, seeing the increase in fees there, I could fill you in on conversations we've had a number of years ago about why we said no to the curbside, kept with the dumpsters, and some of the conversations back and forth during the contract negotiations about how we came up with some of the pricing things that we liked, we didn't like. But obviously that was the council then, but we had extensive conversations just for those topics. Anyway, neither here nor there. But where I'm at right now, I'm okay with the tentative budget that's been approved. It's those additional green sheet items, because I know we have some serious needs. But I'm not ready to do a property tax increase for that without going back and understanding, okay, all the different departments, what are we doing that we maybe don't need to be doing, or how much do we really need until we have that. I'm not on the property tax increase, but I'm happy with what's tentatively adopted, so not too many more questions for me on that.
Can I ask, David, with the business license study that was done by Zions Bank, and you probably haven't, or whoever's working on it, Bill or somebody, probably haven't come up with a number, but of what that might even ballpark figure generate.
Well, the maximum amount if implemented?
Not the maximum, because I don't think that's realistic.
No. Well, let me interject and ask Mr. Linares if he's had that discussion. He's the individual we've kind of I've been working with through the finance, and I don't know if Joel's had that number pop up and discussed. Or maybe Bill, if you can chime in as well.
And you could, the correct answer could be we haven't studied it yet. We don't know what it would do.
Yeah, as of right now, we just have a study that was accepted by the council, but we have not gone through and identified as to between the fees, up to the maximum amount that.
And that's a whole other process once we get done with this to determine how we want to set those fees. We can literally go through them line by line and determine how we want to set them for each specific licensing to see what the impact is. And so that's going to be a process all into itself.
It's going to take some time.
Me and Bill met on that today and are formulating how we're going to bring that to you. And it's going to be quite overwhelming, I think, to be honest with you.
And is there, and there probably isn't even an answer to this question, but on our fee schedule, we have some fees, and I'd have to go look at which ones are there, but they have the date in the last column, and there's a number of them that say pre-2006. And do we have a system in place where we review fees every other year of different departments?
Review's a loose term. We have historically adopted the fee schedule here every year, so I think you could make an argument that technically they're readopted and re-reviewed every year, but that's not up to standard as far as we're concerned. And so that's a part of what we're doing. We're going to go through them, we're going to suggest how we need to update them, and we're going to put together a program where we're reviewing them more frequently, so we're not only getting what we should be getting, but also we're compliant with state code.
Right, and because I do think, just looking at numbers, there's a number of things I think we do in the city that are not covering the cost of doing that, and we've talked a little bit sometimes with water, and we're now seeing an increase in solid waste, and that's just the nature of the beast. But I do think that we ought to look at what we have, and we might find that if we go through some of this, and again, we have a week, so I don't know that how possible it is, but we might be able to find that it's a minimal tax increase because we have this in the pipeline, this in the pipeline, that in the pipeline. I'm just trying to think through processes and systems to
Is there a question there? Is there a question there?
I was kind of asking a question.
The main area where we want to see fees increase are the businesses that are having an impact on our law enforcement and our fire departments, and those are a huge portion of our budget. And so that's where we want to focus in as we get going. But like I said, that's something we plan on bringing to you post-budget.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
All right, so am I open? All right. So I think we could go on for another hour asking questions about things. Pretty easy, but I don't want to. So I have two questions. We have a choice next week. We either adopt the current adopted budget or we raise taxes for the other budget, correct?
No, there's more choices. We could adjust the budget before we adopt it. We have other choices. We can adjust this budget before we adopt it.
Okay, so do we have any adjustments that we want to discuss tonight?
So there was the list of proposed adjustments that was on that paper that we had. I personally don't have any question on. It's this one?
Next week too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the changes to tentative budget, this sheet that was passed out. And I personally don't have too many questions on that one, not for the general fund. That, yeah, we could look at that. We'd probably want to incorporate those into whatever happens next time. And that's where I'd like to also be able to see what green sheet items are out there that would use one-time funds. Because with some of the surplus, I'd be okay approving some of those that are one-time funds, not necessarily those that are ongoing. And I'd like to see those incorporated as well.
So those are my two questions. So I'm on the same level as you are. I like the budget. There's always more we could adjust. I'm also on the same level as Chris, as I don't know if we necessarily need a tax increase this year to make that happen. It's always, I mean, from a political standpoint, you don't want to raise taxes, but also you do want to raise taxes to give more money to those entities that need it. But at this point, I'm on the same boat as you are. I don't think we're at that point where that will help us too much this year, but maybe it's something that we can look into and plan for next year.
It's a hard and fine line to walk because nobody likes to hear about taxes going up, but at the same time, they don't like to hear that their street's not being plowed or that their park's only being mowed every 2 weeks. So if we've got a good, solid process in place and we're able to say, you know what, we all discussed this, and as a group, we came to this consensus, then it's a whole lot easier. When we did the last property tax increase, that's what happened, and we were all on the same page. I mean, in retrospect, I do have there are some things I would have done different, but at the time, we really were all on the same page. This time, I'm really not sure what's going on with some of the different departments because we don't have the same information. So that's why I'm not comfortable going back to folks who are gonna get upset about a potential property tax increase and say, yeah, I'm on board with everybody else. Well, I don't necessarily have the same information that they do, and that's not enough for me.
Now, there are 10 items on this, the approved list on the green sheets that are one-time charges. I didn't add them up, but there are 10 on there.
At the end, on the end of the last page. At the bottom.
No, you can't look at that.
Yeah, well, it's the added up of all the one-times.
Only the ones I have circled.
Oh, the ones.
See, that are one time with no ongoing charges.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
There's only
With
10
no
of them.
ongoing charges. I see what you're saying.
So, of the ones that are on there, there's 10 that don't have any ongoing, they're only one time, and that's,
Right.
one time.
Those are easy to approve because we use fund balance.
Well, ones that like you got the unforeseen minor projects, which is, I understand what that is. That's $150,000. The SCBA's for fire, 207.
Yeah.
Dick Clark's communication system, I thought he died. 14.5.
That's for our New Year's
David
Eve
Clark.
party.
The brine system, 135. Backflow, 156. Backflow compliance, 216. Security cameras, 30,000. Trailer mounted bypass pump, 30,000. So those things are just one-time expenses that are not ongoing expenses. According to what's on the list. I mean, if the pump trailer breaks down, I'm sure there's a maintenance expense that goes with that, but camera breaks down, there's maintenance expenses, but there's not ongoing expenses. So you add those all up, those are probably fall within the reasonable amount of what is capable of being done in the current budget, which you'd have to add them all up to probably $500,000 or between $500,000 and $750,000, somewhere there.
Yeah, and if you just look at the current projections for this year, our general fund balance is 28% of our general fund expenditures. So there's gonna have to be adjustments made there anyway. So we could almost do some of these items as budget amendments for the current fiscal year and spend the money now. Because we have to spend some money before the end of the year.
One of the ongoing recurring expenses that shows up a green sheet item that I would like to get a little bit more information on is the additional pay for crossing guards. We keep hearing about not paying crossing guards enough, but I think we've increased their pay probably 3, maybe even 4 times in the near 7 years that I've been on the council. And I know, speaking with our former head of HR, he said we were more competitive than most of the other departments. I know there's a difference in how we measure compared to how they measure, like the per crossing versus per hour. And you don't necessarily have to respond off the top of your head. I'd be curious to see what we have from HR, but I'd like to see kind of the history of what's been done there previously, and how we compare, because I mean, it's one that comes up a lot. People get fired up about it, especially on social media. But it's one that we've addressed a number of times. So I'd be curious. Anyway.
I don't know about the past, but I know that what's happening is our crossing guards are getting paid $8 a crossing, where the surrounding agencies are getting paid $12 or $15 a crossing.
Is it per crossing or per hour for the other agencies?
What I understood is per crossing.
And that's where we got the discrepancy, because I believe John Gardner had said they're 12 per hour, we're 8 per crossing, but our crossing's only 45 minutes, so we're comparable with or pretty close to what they're doing.
What we just did is we realized that we're paying our crossing guards $8 per crossing, and the other agencies are about $12 per crossing. Some are $15 per crossing. So the issue we're running into is we can't keep it staffed, that we're turning them over so fast that we're having to now pull police officers off the road to do the crossings, because we can't maintain the crossing guards that we have. And so it's causing us problems in many different areas when we're pulling a police officer off the road to do the crossing, is now we're paying a police officer to do the crossing, but now we're taking the police officer away from what his duty is, which is respond to the calls. So it's just, you can see how that's a problem for us.
Oh, yeah. I'd be curious to hear, to review the history on that one, and also that would be on my short list for items to include in any potential changes for next week.
And if I might interject, well, because we're on police and green sheets, may I?
Go ahead.
Councilman
That's one I was gonna talk about too, so.
Oh, well, you make that.
All I wanted to say was the crossing guard pay is one that I wanted to look at as well, because I think per crossing is the only metric that matters. You pull somebody out of their house on a wet, snowy winter morning, they don't care if they're out there for 45 minutes or if they're out there for an hour. They know they're getting $5 less than the other guy that's out there doing a crossing. That's what they know. That's one that I've liked. I would definitely like to see if we can approve at least a good portion of that one. The other ones I wanted to see was the police officers and the possibly the fire. I'm not completely sold on the fire department one yet. I don't see a real decrease in our level of service that we need to address that we're missing out on right now. However, I do see that in the police department. So that's just where I sit on those quick items. Thanks.
Those 10 items, by the way, ended up to $948,000. So almost $1 million for those 10.
And the item I want to may adjust that slightly, because if you look at the police department, one of them that they asked for, which was not on the recommended list, is the funding for outside forensic DNA testing. So we actually shouldn't have that on there because the state provides that for us. However, because the state is so far behind, how many years does it take before we get results from the state, Chief?
Well, it depends on what it is, but we're at least waiting for a year or more on anything we submit. DNA stuff, we're waiting, I want to say at least a year, so we're having to outsource that.
Which I think is totally unreasonable. So I would like to do two things on that. One is for 1 year, us fund that instead of them have to go through the state, so that'd be a one-time fund. But also take some extra one-time funds and give to our lobbyists, so our lobbyists can go to our legislators and get that fixed, so the following year, we can go back and start using the state system that's supposed to and have them fix that state system so it doesn't take a year or whatever that time frame is, because that's too important and our police officers can't do their job when the state doesn't do their job. So, and that way we could put that in there and get that covered without affecting the other ones. And that should be a temporary fix. Well, a permanent fix on with temporary expenses.
I guess we're done.
I guess, what else would you like to add?
Well, at this point, I just want to make sure I address certainly a concern I heard from Councilman McConaughey that we need to have a truth in taxation hearing because that's the process that requires us to raise taxes if we want to have that money to cover the green sheets. I'm not delaying the process. That's not the purpose behind trying to ask for a truth in taxation hearing. So if it's helpful to have Ms. Vincent explain that timeline to the other council members, she's prepared to do that. We asked her to be ready to explain that.
No, I'm good on that. I was just referencing a conversation that Councilmember Anderson and I had earlier today, where we were playing with the idea of, okay, well, should we do the truth in taxation? Should we support a truth in taxation hearing for the purpose of giving us as a council extended time to discuss the budget? That was the conversation I was referencing, he and I, and that's where as we spoke, I came to the conclusion that that's not something that personally I would support. But if there is, if others want to see a tax increase, then by all means, yeah, we have to do the truth and taxation hearing. I just don't favor
Thank you for that
route.
clarification. Excuse me. With that said, I think what I've heard from the council is we have some work ahead of us between now and the 13th. Frankly, it's because of the way the agenda is going to be presented, you may get some of that information later next week. It may not be attached to the agenda, but the request for information relevant to where we see the city headed in the next 5 years, I think we can give you a pretty good idea on the 13th. It may not be in the agenda packet Friday. Anything further from the council?
Open mic still.
Last item, again, circling back to, what was it, SB 136, where we started the conversation. I know there's been talk about potentially having that on the agenda for next council meeting. My personal preference would be to not have it on the agenda. That's just me. I don't like the process. I agree with some of the things that were said earlier today about, I just feel that the way it's done, we're going to be the bad guy no matter what. And I would rather us not take a position and not have a vote for or against, rather than see it voted down and shot down by West Jordan. I would rather have us say nothing at all than have a formal no to it. I think that might hurt us. So,
And I totally understand.
Based on-
It is going to be on the agenda. We're going to put it on the agenda, and we can decide at that time whether we want to support it or not support it. So it will be on the agenda. And I don't know, Chris, some of the things that we've heard are things like this. Well, if you don't vote for it, then you must not need the money.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, we may not get the money. And I don't want that to, and if it does pass and we don't have those funds coming in, our people are still going to be paying the sales tax.
And that's why I don't, based on the conversation I heard tonight, it didn't sound too enthusiastic or supportive. So rather than risking a no vote, that's why I would prefer to hear silence and just not see a vote at all on it, see it not on the agenda, rather than see West Jordan saying no to it. Well, they didn't say yes, but they didn't say no either.
I have
That's kind of where
heard,
I'm
and we may
thinking.
need staff to research this, I have heard from that the county in their resolution has said that if you don't take a vote on it, it's counted as one or the other, and I don't remember which one. Or your population is taken out of the calculation, or it's added into the calculation, but it's added in a specific way, or it's assumed you would have voted the average way of everybody else, or something like that. It's, the county put that in their process as far as what a abstention means. So before we abstain, I'd like to know what that is.
I just really don't like how they're making us the fall guy for a decision that they should be making, and that's why I don't want to play that game.
And I totally understand. Taylorsville passed it tonight as well. And so they are on board too.
I agree with, I think we should debate it next week and.
It needs to be
discuss
on
it.
the agenda. We needed to tell them we are either in or out. We either want the money or we don't want the money.
Well, that's not the question.
That's what'll happen though.
But it's not, because you heard Cameron say tonight that if it passes, even if we vote no and it passes, we will get our 40% of that money that comes in that's due to us. We will still get it.
Well,
Because the
there's-
county enacts it for the county.
If there's support to have the conversation next week, then so be it. I just threw that out there because if there were 4 that didn't want to have the conversation, it would save us the issue of having to go out there in the public and have a formal yes or no from the city. So that's why I threw it out before it came out on the agenda. So
we'll discuss it next week.
Oh, yeah, it will be on the agenda. We can discuss. Any further discussion tonight? Any further remarks?
My spice is cinnamon, by the way, if anybody wants some. I Googled the translation.
Oh, did you? Good.
I use a lot of cinnamon.
The store came from not Marjan. Marjan Al Riyadh. That's where it came from.
I'm going to jump in while the open mic is still here. I would support Chris McConaughey on abstaining. If there are two others that want to do that, I think that would be, I see some benefits to it. So I would be a second one of that.
Is there a date that we have to vote by?
On the resolution, on 136, is that, you have to have a vote prior to June 23rd. So the evening of the 22nd would be the last time.
We can either do it next week or in 2 weeks.
No, we don't have a meeting on the 20th.
We'd have to have a special meeting.
We have a meeting on the 13th and the 27th.
Next week or not?
So you could schedule a special session. The way the vote is looking like it's going to line up, that listing of cities that still have to vote include West Valley, Sandy, Salt Lake. Looking at those numbers, I don't think it's sufficient to get them over the 67%. Those are the three largest cities besides West Jordan. Sandy's 93,000 residents, West Valley's 134,000, and Salt Lake is 191.
If I remember right, I think they had said most of the Salt Lake voters wanted it. Salt Lake City. So Salt Lake City, there's a good chance they're going to say yes. Am I wrong there? If I could predict.
As this goes forward, we have more time to pull it, to leave it on. I would suggest we let the other cities have their votes, calculate numbers as they go, and factor that into our decision as we go forward. And make this decision in a few days, not necessarily tonight.
Well, Murray's supposed to have it on for tonight. Or
Obviously.
Oh, that was last night. They did it. They passed it.
Obviously, if it reaches that number before we ever get to Tuesday, we don't need to have it on there. So I think we watch the numbers and see what they do.
Yeah, several of them are not meeting until next week. So, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
A second.
Mr.
Oh,
President.
wait. We have.
I just want to comment before you adjourn. I would be remiss if I didn't say this, but I've been in the fire service a long time, 39 years. I'm passionate about what I do. I'm passionate about protecting our citizens. And just the comment that I heard, I agree with Councilman McConaughey. Yeah, I feel everyone should have this information, but I'm telling you, I would not be doing my job if I didn't have the opportunity to explain to you what dire need our fire department is in. If you realized every day how many times there's one unit in this whole city, you don't understand. If I could sit down and explain it to you, I could show you on paper. I can formulate anything you need to know. I know everything about the fire service. And I'm telling you, if you do not approve them 9 people, you're putting our citizens at risk. I'm telling you that right now. I wish I could have presented to all of you. I only got the chance to present to 3. I agree, you all should have heard it. But that's what I have to say. I'd be willing to meet with any of you, but we haven't increased our staffing since 2000. Our call volumes went up 77%. Our revenues went up 278%. And I got facts and figures. I got a booklet that I handed out to the 3 council members that I met with. So I'm passionate about this. I don't think I'd be open to say this to the citizens out there. But if you don't understand it, how can we sell this? But I'm telling you, you don't realize how many times a day this city is empty. There's nothing there. For 9 people, you're putting a lot of people at jeopardy. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief. David, do you have any further comments tonight?
No, sir.
We have a motion to adjourn, a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.